All right, Notre Dame fans, you don't know what I had to watch the last 30 minutes. It was this guy trying to dance during the intro music, and it was not pretty.
I was beatboxing.
It was, yeah, that if that's what you want to call it, whatever. But hey, we are back, Notre Dame fans. We're ready for another great show today, and my man Vince is back. You're not on probation. People did not understand. You've been on vacation last week, and that's why you weren't on the show down in good old Kentucky. So you've had one show, and this is your new schedule. I've also tried to explain to people that Vince is also coaching baseball right now at Riley High School. So Mondays and Wednesdays he's not on the show. His choice, not mine. So Vince is still part of the crew. I think every time there's a while we don't see you, people are like, did he fire? Did Brian fire Vince?
It would never be that I quit. It would be that you fired me.
Exactly. No, did not fire Vince. That's my dude. But Vince, we got a lot to talk about today, and we've talked a ton of recruiting lately, and I want to talk some Notre Dame team, man. So that's where I want to be. And Notre Dame had a practice today.
We got a taste.
Vince had a little took a little morning off. Vince and Chris took a little morning off, and they went to Notre Dame's practice. Now, again, if there's somebody reporting that so-and-so was starting, there was really no team stuff today. They got stretch and then some warm-up stuff.
Right.
Got the chance to see some guys move around. But what we've done this spring, Vince, is we've tried to do the video a little differently.
Yes.
As opposed to showing like a couple clips of each position group, which is fine. Totally, there's great value to that. We've just decided to do something different instead of doing what everybody else does. We've tried to focus on a position group every time. We've done offensive line, we've done receivers, we've done DBs. Today, we focus on the quarterbacks, Vince. And so what we're actually going to do to kick off the show is we're going to play the video from today. Vince, you're more than welcome to kind of talk through it, but I just figured I'd just let people start things off by looking at the quarterback highlights from today. It's mostly it's literally just about every throw that Tyler Buckner and Drew Pine made during warmups. There's a couple like just 5-yard away warm-up throws we didn't get on there, but for the most part, it's what we were able to see, what the media was able to see today at practice. And then after that, we're out after 5 periods, and there is no team. So there were no team periods today that you could look at and say, so and so is starting over such and such. Anyway,
just stretch.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to do. And then we're going to kind of get into, there's been a lot of talk about the Notre Dame offense and what it should be and could be and all that. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today and it comes from a conversation we were having on the message board yesterday about, has Notre Dame closed the gap and where has it closed the gap? And I gave my feelings on where it has closed the gap and where it hasn't. And if you actually look at things, Vince, they've closed the gap, in my opinion, on more positions on offense and defense. And just from a pure talent standpoint. And it's about time that the offense start actually playing to its potential.
Yep.
And so we're going to share some of the different things we've heard. And it's been wild. It's like when I talk to some defensive people, like, man, the offense has been kicking our butt. And then I'll talk to some people on offense and like, yeah, we've been doing well. Then others are like, we suck. It's just really funny how that goes. It's like that every spring, but even more so this spring. Like last spring, the offensive coaches were like, yeah, we suck. And the defensive coaches were like, yeah, they suck. So this year, the defensive coaches have had a lot more, not coaches, the defensive sources I have been a lot more, boy, this offense is performing really well. And it was funny. We had Sean talk to a recruit who was at Saturday's practice. We had 2 different recruits were talking about Saturday's practice, and both of them were like, yeah, the offense was taking it to the defense for most of the time, but the defense recovered late. And, Jordan Patelho had a really big day and that kind of thing. I heard he was all over. So just a ton going on. It's just why you need to be on the message board, everybody, because we've had 2 intel pieces last week on it. But today, folks, we're going to just share with you just sort of what we saw today at practice. So we were able to cut it up. I was able to look at all the clips that Vince gave, and this is probably like 90% of the clips that we saw.
Yeah.
There are no edits out from bad passes. There was a couple periods where they were literally just going through warm-ups, just 5 yards apart. And I didn't put that in.
And the other period was handing off.
Right,
so
exactly. And we only get to play 3 minutes of clips. So
that's all we're allowed to play by Notre Dame. Just so not that we have imposed that on ourselves.
No, I'd put everything out there. It'd be like 30-minute highlight videos.
Right.
And we'd never be allowed to go back to practice again.
Yeah.
So here it is. We're going to play that for y'all and have some fun with it. So here goes. Here's the practice, the Notre Dame quarterback clips from today's practice. So Vince, that's today's practice from the highlights for the quarterback. So it was kind of funny. We don't have any clips on there about the Ron Paulus Jr. or the third, or I forget which one
He's
he
down
is.
the line somewhere, yeah.
But I got to say, he still has, I mean, a lot of work to do. But I'll tell you what, he's got a strong arm. That's the one thing I did. I'd say today I thought him and Buckner are the two guys that threw with the most zip.
Yes,
and they just get the most RPMs on their throws.
He spins the ball the best. Is that what somebody used to say? But look, I will say this about Ron, and people know that I've been down on Ron, and I because he's from the area, and I've seen him play many times. And today, he impressed me today with his arm strength. He is by far the biggest quarterback in the room. So I mean, he's the tallest, he's the widest, he's the biggest dude, right? I mean, he's a big man. It was funny because Chris and I were watching him throw, and and Chris Summers is the other guy that gets video for us, and he's like, man, I'm surprised he's not in the tight end room yet. Like, I mean, he's a big dude, right? And he by far, well, I shouldn't say by far, but he had the strongest arm of the group. Now, he is not in any way mobile, right?
We don't got to take shots at him. We know he's not, but just
his arm was strong,
nice
and it was accurate, and that was something that he struggled with in high school, was accuracy. He always had a strong arm, but his accuracy was a bit of an issue, and he was accurate today, and it was strong, and he looked good. So I was impressed with Ronnie. No, there's no question about it. As far as, do we want to get into the other guys?
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about it. Let's just kind of go with the order of which we had him in the video.
Yeah, so
obviously Tyler Buck will kick things off with Tyler Buckner.
Yeah, Tyler had more zip on his ball than any of the guys that have the opportunity to play. I thought at first, when practice began, it was a lot of change ups. It was just a lot of, kind of lofted it in there, not going through the motions in a bad way, but just kind of getting where he needed to be. Obviously, that's his warm up routine and how he gets ready. But once he started throwing to receivers and he started throwing to those guys in the spots, and he was going through, not progressions, but Tommy Rees was telling him, he had guys set up in 3 different spots, and they would drop back, and then Tommy Rees would tell him who to throw it to, right? So it simulates going through an RPO or going through a progression, right? And by far had the most zip on his ball. He was very, very accurate. There's no question. Once they started throwing more downfield, it was clear that, Drew had to take kind of an extra giddy up step to get the ball down the field a little bit more. Just as accurate, like his accuracy was not affected, but he needed a little bit more to get it down there, right? When that and
the ball kind of hung up a little bit more today. It takes a little bit longer to get there. I noticed that because there were a couple of the throws at the end. They were making far hash throws,
right?
And
they were on left hash and they were going to the right sideline.
Takes a lot more,
oomph.
Those throws.
That's not an easy throw. Okay, those are NFL type throws, right? I mean, you're going across the field, etc. So I thought those guys looked good. I think Tyler looked better today. Again, this is a very, very small window. We talked about this on the last show, Brian, about how it's one. Not only is it just one practice, but it was 5 periods of one practice, right? There's so much more you can glean if you've been at every practice, and you can kind of judge that way. But within these 5 periods, what they were asked to do in front of the media, Tyler looked better today. He looked a little bit more smooth. He didn't look like he was efforting as much. I'm not sure if that's a word, but he looked a little bit smoother than Pine did. Again, Pine is your vocal leader. He's still high-fiving everybody when they come together, all of those different things. He's still going to be a very important piece of this team if he doesn't win the starting role. But today, Tyler looked better to me.
Which right now we don't expect him to. I mean, that's the update from our board. I mean, we've had multiple. Every time I've talked to anybody at Notre Dame, any remotely related at Notre Dame, and I'm not talking like Marcus Freeman and Tom Reese. I'm not talking about those guys because they're not going to say those kind of things. They're going to say what needs to be said, and it's a battle and all that. But anytime I talk to any other source, it's like, yeah, Buckner's the better quarterback. I mean, it's been that way all spring.
Sure.
There's been a day here and a day there where, Tyler made some mistakes. Drew played better, but Tyler's just been the better quarterback. So far that's been the case. Now, again, this battle's not over. There's a couple more practices left. There's 3 more practices left. No, 1, 2. There's 4 more practice? 3 or 4 more. No, 3 more practices left after today. Trying to do the math. I'm like, well, yeah. So, and then of course there's summer and fall camp, but
and we can talk about Angeli too. I
I
mean,
mean, that's fine if you want. I mean, people talking about we don't need to have too much of a conversation about third string quarterback. Okay,
right.
we can have that
He
conversation down the
looks
road.
like a kid. I mean,
He's a skinny
he's
freshman
yeah,
who isn't going to
right.
hopefully doesn't have to play this year. And then okay, we can
Absolutely.
move on to stuff that is going to be the case because again he's a freshman who's not where the other guys are, and he's if he plays this year, it's going to be a problem. Okay,
Absolutely.
means stuff went bad, and it's not a shot on Steve. It's just most freshmen aren't ready to play.
And most third string guys aren't expected to play. I mean, that's just the way it is, right? I mean, this isn't last year. This isn't the situation
Right.
that was going on last year. So,
Right.
he looks like an early enrollee freshman. I mean,
Right.
so there is what it is.
Okay, so let's move on to really the team because it was interesting. We had a conversation on the message board, and it kind of went through yesterday, Vince, and the premise was, is the gap closed at Notre Dame,
Right.
and has Notre Dame closed the gap, and there's a lot of excitement at the program, and went through different positions and things like that, and I responded, and I tried to be as objective as possible, and I went through it, and there was really only 3 positions that I marked down. Like one of people were like, the coaching gap is closed. And I was like, not yet. I mean, I think it's got a chance to be, but let's see these guys actually,
Right.
coach a game together. We haven't seen this staff coach a game together before. And I'm excited about it. I think it has a chance to be that, but let's see it, so you can't say the gap is closed until they've coached together. And, it's just the reality. But, so I went through position by position, quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, O-line, D-line, linebacker, corner, and safety. And there were 3 positions that I had of those that I have as the gap is closed. And the gap, so what does that mean? And we've talked about this. It's essentially is that position group to the level where it can be a reason why you go out and win a championship or not. Now, you look at Clemson in 2018 and 2016, they had several positions that weren't gap. The gap isn't closed relative to the standard that we set, but you need to have enough of those type of positions, and you need to at least be good enough of those other positions to be there. And so I can't think of a single team. Bama's had a couple teams where you're like, yeah, each group plays at a high level, but Bama had even in 2020, they had parts of their team that weren't like elite. They weren't, among the 5 to 8 to 10 best in the country. So you look at it and like, that's kind of the standard. And to me, running, so when I look at it as like, do you have one of the top 5 position groups in the country, present and future? And so we went through it, and it's interesting, Vince, just from a pure talent standpoint, there's more positions on defense that are there than on offense and defense. And like, I didn't have a single position on offense or on defense that the gap was closed, even the D line, because as good as the defensive end position projects to be, there's other positions where like they're not right now with where the defensive tackle position is. It's really good. I think it'll be fine this year, but it's not elite. Like there's going to be guys starting and playing for Notre Dame that wouldn't play at Georgia, or Alabama. That's just the reality. Now, doesn't mean that those guys aren't good football players and can't be part of a great line. I think the line as a whole will be really good, but it's partly because you have a couple guys that are really good, and then some others. And so I think there's room for improvement on the defensive line, mainly inside. Is a point of emphasis. Now, I also mentioned that you got Tyson Ford and Aiden Gobira. That's a great start. You've got Keon Keeley, Brennan Vernon. If you can go out and get Jason Moore and Devin Houston to finish this class off, then I'm okay. The gap is closing. It's not closed yet. Linebacker, it's close, but still no. And that's one where I think some people disagree with me, because I'm like, look, of the veterans, the only guy that I would say can athletically go play at a Bama, at a Georgia, is Marist. That's it. We got to see Prince Kollie emerge. He's got to show a lot. And the freshmen are freshmen. Like, recruiting rankings wise, sure, but we need to see them be able to do that for more than 1 year before I can say they're going to go be like some of these other teams where their entire starting linebacking core is NFL draft picks. And so it's close, but it's not there yet, talent wise. It's cornerback. It's not close. You've got one great player and then a bunch of question marks. And then safety, it's very close at safety. That's the one I was surprised by as I thought through it. And it's really about what's happened in the last 7-8 months, which is you got Brandon Joseph to transfer, who's had a great spring.
Yeah, really.
And then the move of Ramon Henderson and Xavier Watts to the position has really changed things. That doesn't happen, then this answer is much different. And then you look at what's recruiting, because also the answer also took into account recruiting. You've got Brandon Joseph, Ramon Henderson, Xavier Watts. You've got the other veterans, and then you've got Peyton Bowen and Adon Schuler committed in the class. So you feel much better about that. But none of those are to the level where I'm like, that group is definitely better than all but 3 or 4 teams in the country. Offensively, I don't feel that way. I feel that there are 3 position groups that are as good as anybody in the country, in my opinion, talent-wise, coaching-wise, and then looking forward to the future. And that's running back, tight end, and offensive line. And so it kind of got me thinking, like, why is there so much angst about this offense when most of us would agree that this is going to be at the very least one of the 10 best backfields in the country? This is arguably the best tight end in the room in the country. Georgia's the only one that can challenge that, and that's mainly about recruiting rankings, not what guys have actually done in college, behind Blake Bowers. But you're talking about minimum top 2 to 3. And then you look at the offensive line. There just aren't more than 4 or 5 offensive lines in the country that have the combination of coaching, talent, and experience that Notre Dame is going to have this year. Now, there's some with maybe a little bit better talent, maybe. I can't think of any off the top of my head. There are some that have more experience, and I don't know if there's any that has more talent. And so, I mean, coaching-wise. So you look at it and say, boy, there's 3 positions, then quarterback. That's one where the gap has not been closed. And we need to see what Tyler Buckner can do, and looking to the future. And until Dante Moore decides he wants to be at Notre Dame or not, I don't think the future is there yet either. They need to get Dante Moore to be there. So, Vince, looking at the offense and defense, am I wrong in your opinion? Am I wrong on any of those? Or not wrong? It's not right or wrong. It's an opinion.
Sure.
Do you have a different opinion on any of those compared to where I'm at with both sides of the ball, and then we'll kind of transition to the offense?
Well, it's funny because when you made that statement to me before the show that the offense is a heck of a lot closer than the defense, I kind of did a double take. I was like, what? Really? But then when you go through it and you look at position by position, it does make sense. Now, I think I'm repeating what you said, so you can correct me if I'm wrong here. But if I took the defensive line and I split it up interior and edge, I feel like the gap has been closed on the edge. I feel like they're darn close on the edge. If not,
let me ask you this question.
It's real close.
Let me ask you this question, and here's what just because I asked myself this question.
Okay.
I'm just going to get your thoughts on it. If Isaiah Foskey goes down, do you still feel that way?
No.
See, that's my issue.
You're talking more like the whole room, not just the front line.
That's kind of my issue, Vince,
right.
Is when you look at some of these other schools, like Georgia last year loses Adam Anderson and they don't miss a beat. Defensive end. He gets kicked off, he gets suspended, and they don't miss a beat. I feel like if Will Anderson got hurt at Alabama, they just put Dallas Turner in there and he's a monster. I don't feel like Notre Dame has the depth yet where I can say if he goes down, they're going to be fine. Where a couple of years ago, you could have said that. And, I think that's where, maybe Mike Elson's recruiting wasn't quite as good as it needed to be in some areas. You know what I mean? And they've had some injuries and different things. But if he goes down, I don't think you would feel the same way.
We don't feel as good about it. Yeah, that wouldn't be a gap close situation. I would agree with that. I think that they have the opportunity to be there with the way recruiting is going. Right. They're trending in the right direction. Definitely. I would say. But as the roster stands right now, even with committed guys in the 23 class, those guys aren't set in stone, right? They haven't signed on the dotted line, so you can't really say that they're part of the room yet, right? So they have not closed it then. So, yeah, I see where you're coming from on that one. Linebacker, I love the freshman class. I think the freshman class is really, really good. Now, the problem is they haven't had an opportunity to show it on the field. And once we see this group of 4 guys matriculate through and become starters, I think that you could say that the gap has been closed. But right now it's all potential, right? I mean, it's not real yet. I mean, it's recruiting rankings, and we think that, this group could be really good, right? And their recruiting rankings are where they are for a reason, but they haven't closed the gap because those guys haven't proven it on the field.
And you're talking about
linebacker.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is like running back, I'm not relying on running back. You can make a similar case. I have it as gap closed. You could make a case, well, those guys have to prove it. That's true. But there are guys that we've seen play college football.
Right.
That's the problem with the linebacking group is the guys that most people would count on saying the gap is closed are guys that have never played it down in college football.
Right.
And that's the difference. And that's part of my concern with corner is, if Ryan Burns this, if Benjamin Morrison's as good as I think, if Jaden Mickey's as good as I think, if they're able to keep Justin Rhett and get one. Now all of a sudden I'm feeling really good about the future of the cornerback. Philip Riley and Chance.
Can I interject something here real quick from practice today?
Yeah, of course.
During FSA, which is their warm-up period, their agility and warm-ups and things like that, right? They have on the big screen, they got highlights from practice going. Every time I looked up, it was a Jaden Mickey highlight of him knocking the ball down, getting in somebody's face. Like it was the 21 show. Like it was, maybe it was just happenstance that every time I looked up, like he was making plays, but the dude was making a lot of plays. And I don't know if it was just pump up Jaden Mickey day, but on the big screen, man, he was making some plays. So that kid excites me. I love the way that kid carries himself and the way he plays. So,
and I don't think he's the best corner commit in the class. And so, there's a chance. But again, we haven't seen Ryan Barnes really play a meaningful snap of football. We haven't seen Philip Riley do it.
Excited about him. Yeah.
We haven't seen Chance Tucker do it. And so that's the thing is, at least at running back, you're like, we've seen what Logan Diggs can do when he's on his game. We've seen what Chris Tyree can do. It's very little, but we've seen what Audric can do. And running back is just a position where experience doesn't mean a whole lot. I mean, you watch college football, it's just not a position where you need to be a third-year guy. So anyway, linebacker, DB, Vince, what about the offense?
Oh, if we're going to talk offense, I think wide receivers a ways away yet. I mean, obviously there's guys that we're excited about.
There's some good players at the top, but depth
depth is a problem. I mean, if one or two of those guys go down this year, it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. Now, if everybody's healthy,
it should be pretty good.
It should be a good group. It should be a really good group. I'm excited about this group. But you can't say that the gap is closed, though, because one or two injuries and you're
really one. There's really one to me, and that's Lorenzo Styles.
Yes.
The reason I say that is because I don't feel like you're in a situation with him that if he goes down, does anyone else in that group strike you as a go-to guy?
Replacement for him? No.
Now, Braden Lindsey's a big play guy that's a rotational guy. Avery Davis is super solid. Deion Coles, is going to need work. He hasn't really shown that yet this year. I think he's still going to need a little bit more time.
I will say Colesy has a lot of tools. And he's got the physical tools. Like, he works his butt off. You can tell when you watch him in practice. He's still inconsistent. Today, on April 12th, right? I mean, he's still inconsistent. Now, that could change with the rest of spring practice and fall practice and all of those things. But as of right now, he's inconsistent for me. He drops balls he shouldn't drop. You know what I mean? Like, he's inconsistent. That's the best word I can come up with. Lorenzo Styles is Mr. Consistency. And I feel like you could put him at any of the three positions and he could be successful too. That's the other part of it. So he's versatile and he's consistent and he's a playmaker. So he's a dude and there's nobody to replace him.
So the other one, quarterback. I mean, do you agree with my stance there? It's getting closer if
they get Dante Moore. If they get Dante Moore and Tyler Buckner pans out, then I feel really good about that group. Yes,
it's 100%. Closed. I mean, that's the thing is it's closed. It's closed. Quarterback, you need to see it. Right, more so than running back.
Right, and this is a big year. I mean, this is a huge year for the quarterback position at Notre Dame because number one, you're talking about we've been talking about Tyler Buckner for 3-4 years now. Okay, he's going to probably get his opportunity, right? But on top of that, you've got Coach Reese, who now there's no more excuses, right? There's no more, and I'm not saying that we were making excuses. What I'm saying is he is the guy. Like
I was. Okay, I'll say it. I think Brian Kelly held him back. Oh, there's no question about it. I'll make the excuse.
Did we?
I mean,
we haven't said.
I learned from the master of that the last 12 years. So
have we said it on the show today? I can't even remember because you and I talked about it. Like
the
difference.
Okay, no, we didn't. Go ahead and talk about it. Yeah.
The first thing that I said to you when you called me today to talk about practice was Tommy Reese is a different dude. Like he is a different dude at practice, and he is so much more involved with the quarterbacks. He's jumping in and literally showing these guys how to do play action, to get down deep. He's showing them how he wants them to throw. They were doing some back foot kind of throws, some quick stuff, and he was showing them how to do it. He was showing how the footwork he wants when they're getting hit in the pocket. Like, he's so much more active. He's so much more physically involved with the quarterbacks. In the past, he was coaching them up, but he would kind of stand back with his arms folded, very much like Brian Kelly was, right? And now he's just involved. He's literally hands-on, and it is a different Tommy Rees. And so from that aspect, right, from that point of view, this is a big year for Notre Dame and the quarterbacks, right? Because he's more involved. And so if they're successful, a lot of that credit has to go to Tommy Rees because he is right there and he's doing it. And if they're not successful, same thing. A lot of that has to go towards him. So
right.
I think this is a big year for the quarterback position, not only on the field, but from a coach's standpoint and from a recruiting standpoint. Because if they can lock up Dante Moore, then the gap is closed.
All right.
That's
So how about the three? Agree with you completely. How about the other three? Like, are there anywhere you'd say, you know what, I'm going to push back on the gap being closed there?
I feel like offensive line, I love offensive line. I love the guys that are in the room. I still need to see a little bit more from the interior, I think, before I officially say the gap is closed.
Let's say they got a potential first-team All-American at center.
Absolutely. I'm talking more about guard, I think.
Right, but here's the thing I look at is number one is nobody has 5 studs across the board. Nobody.
That's fair. That's
not
fair.
Bama, not anybody. Number one. I look at it. Here's the reason why I say it. Number one, I think you have the best online coach in the business. If not the best, one of the top 3.
Agreed.
Number two, you have great tackles and a great tackle talent who played well last year and a great center when he's on his game. And well, he was a really good center. I think he's going to be great with
the proper coaching. Yeah.
That's a pretty great start for me. I mean, you're strong right up the middle. And look, if Andrew Kristofic simply does this year what he did last year with those things around him, they'll be fine. They're not going to have the big hole at right guard like they had last year. And as a unit, they're going to be coached better. So, and then I also project forward with the recruiting that they have and what I think they're going to have. So I think that's the one Vin could probably make the biggest case against.
Yeah,
in my opinion. But I'm just looking at it and like, Harry Hiestand consistently developed great offensive lines, and he did not inherit the talent in 2012 that he inherited this year. With all due respect to Zach Martin, certainly Zach was a great player and Chris Watt was really good, but there was a bigger drop off between 3, 4, and 5 than there is
now. And that's fair. I think the gap the gap considerably closed when they got Harry Hiestand to sign on. Like, I think you and I have always said that they've got talent. And I guess I'm still a little shell shocked from the last couple of years offensive line wise. And so once the 22 season starts and the offensive line is mauling people, and I'm excited, and you know what I'm saying? Like, once I see the Harry Hiestand effect in a game, I'll be like, okay, yeah, you're right, Brian. I'm just not there just yet. And it's because of the guard.
Fair. Fair.
Like I said, I'm still shell shocked, to be honest with you.
Sure.
You know, it's just, I loved the offensive line under Harry, and it's just,
well, but even we saw Notre Dame's current GA 2 years ago.
Right.
Played such a key role in creating a really good offensive line, and he's also back as the GA. So,
which is huge. That's another gap closing move. It is. It is.
So that's why, for me, I'm one to go there. But again, I think it's fair to say I got to see it first. I think that's always a fair thing to say.
Right.
And then the tight end, the reason I go tight end is, look, there's a drop off between Michael Mayer and whoever plays next.
Okay.
But the reality is you're still going to be really good there.
Yes.
Right. Like, Kevin Bauman's a solid player. I think Mitchell Evans is coming along. Kane Barong, I think, is going to be a problem for people when he finally gets healthy. And then you've got the best tight end tandem in the country coming in. So will your best player still be your tight end? No, but you're not going to have the drop off that, in my opinion, you would have if you lost Foskey. That's not saying that Foskey's better than Mayer. I have yet to talk to a person that says anything other than our best player is Michael Mayer. I mean, everybody I talk to says that. Offense, defense,
Absolutely.
everybody.
And they have,
and that's saying a lot. Like he has really raised his level of play.
And based on what I have seen at practice, although limited, right? The second tight end, whoever that ends up being, right, is going to be more of a factor than in the past.
Right.
I really do feel that way because they actively practice throwing the ball up the seam. They actively practice having a tight end as a group catch balls. They didn't do that as much in the past. As much. Now, they did it, but not as much. And so I really feel like not only are they going to abuse the tight ends up the seam, but also, the slot receivers and other they are using the whole field at practice.
Right.
And I haven't seen that in the past.
We've seen that every time.
Yeah.
Like from the videos you've sent me, we've seen that every single time.
They're using the whole field. I love the way they're practicing right now.
The offense has changed.
Yes.
I mean, what we're seeing, from what I can tell, we're seeing the stuff we saw at the end of last year.
Yes.
And then a little bit more.
So, yeah, absolutely.
Which we won't get into, obviously, because we want to be allowed back. and to me, somebody asked about Joe Alt. Jake Piper asked, "How's Joe Alt looking?" And that's part of the reason. Like, we had an intel piece, and I'll say it now, and this is why you need to be on the message board. We had an intel piece last week, Vince, while you're on vacation. I don't know if you saw it, but what it was is that I've talked to multiple sources that have said Joe Alt's actually been their best offensive lineman this spring. And I'm like, is Blake not having a good spring? Like, no. Blake's everything we thought he would be. It's just Joe has just played phenomenal.
Yep.
Now, there's other people I talked to that have said Blake's their best lineman. But the point is, the tackles have been a problem. Like, I mean, for the defense, I mean, they've been really, really good. And we keep hearing that the offense tends to win more and more of the practices. Vince, normally this time of the year, it's the defense that's ahead of the offense. Now,
because offense is about timing and things like that.
Foskey's been a little limited.
Sure.
I was told he was more active in the scrimmage on Saturday, and the defense did better. It's not a coincidence, right? I mean, it's not a coincidence.
Right.
You don't have Jason Adamiola. Justin Adamiola has been a little limited this spring, just kind of as they're working to try to get reps for younger guys. And so J.D. Bertrand's not out there. Cam Hart's not out there, right? So, I mean, you would hope that the offense would be better.
Right.
But it's a good sign, and you hear about Lorenzo having a great spring. And I'm going to tell you the guy that I continue to hear more about. But the whole thing before I go off track again, when I heard that about Joe Alt, that's when I started to be like, okay, this line's going to be really good.
Yeah.
When people are trying to determine who's better, Blake or Joe, and some of the clips I've seen, like, Blake's he's big time. You just kind of like, look, that's why I feel like this is going to be a really good offensive line, like a really, really good offensive line.
Yeah.
And it's just the expectation, because you've got Harry and Chris Watt working together. That's the part that kind of has me fired up, if I'm just going to be completely honest with you.
I get it.
The other one I wanted to kind of get your opinion on, Vince, was running back. And then we're going to try and transition into like the expectations for the unit this year.
It's funny because, when we talk about, which room is the deepest, which room is the best, right? Running back always comes up. I mean, they're a deep room. I think that you've got three guys in there and really maybe even four at the moment, because Price is one heck of a good looking young back. You've got 3 to 4 guys in there that can play.
Right.
And they all can play different roles in this offense. And I think that's only going to make
them they can all be
stronger.
The guy.
They could
that's
be.
The other thing.
Yes, they absolutely could be, but I don't think they have to be.
Right.
I think is the other thing. I think you can ride the hot hand with this group, right? And I think Dylan McCullough said that there's like 8 different starting roles as a running back, right? And he's got to find out who those guys are going to be. I think that's a great way to look at it, because then you can hone in on what these guys are really good at. But I think if one of these guys get hot, you ride them and you go with it, right? And I think that could be any one of these guys. And so they're deep. I think they're really deep.
The thing is, we heard at the beginning of spring how good Chris Tyree looked.
Sure.
Then he got the concussion. He's been out. I think he's going to be back this week.
He was back today. He was out today.
He was back today.
But they didn't do any hitting, obviously.
Right.
But he was full go on all the drills.
Right. So he's back now. But even when he was gone, then Logan Diggs starts getting more reps and he's balling. That meant more reps for Audric. I mean, this is the other thing. This is when you start feeling good. It's like you talk to 5 different people and you get 3 different opinions about who the best running back has been so far. Right.
That's a great sign.
It's a great sign. And they all pick a veteran, but they would all say, like, I'd hear people say, oh, Chris has been really good. But man, this number 20 is going to be special.
Yeah.
Boy, Logan's looked great, but this 20 is going to be special. Man, Audrick's having a great spring, but this 20 is going to be special. I mean, that's literally what I hear every time I talk to somebody. Of course, 20 would be Jadarian Price for those who don't know. So you start getting excited about it, and you start to say, boy, this backfield's got a chance to be good. But it's kind of those two together is really the thing. I want to clear something else up. Somebody said, can I clarify what I'm hearing about Jordan Patelho having a dominant spring? I didn't say that. I said that he was told he had a dominant practice on Saturday. I don't know what kind of spring he's had. The reality is if Jordan Patelho's out there, he's going to be good. That's never been the question.
Nope.
Ever. The question is, will he always be out there? That's the only question ever about Jordan Patelho. So, Vince, you kind of look at this offense and we talk about, I just have, you could argue depth is a problem. You could argue a receiver.
Sure.
You could argue experience is an issue at quarterback. But what you can't argue, in my opinion, about this offense is, does it have enough talent to be a really good offense? I've heard people say, we know the O-line, the receiving core doesn't have any great players. And we'll see. And we'll see about
yes,
that.
we will. Because I would put my money on 21 being a pretty darn good receiver.
But even if he's not a great player, you don't have to be the great player because you have the best tight end in college football, right? In my opinion. With all due respect to Blake Bowers, who's a really good young player, but Michael Mayer is the best tight end in college football, in my opinion.
Yep.
And so you have that. You have backs that can make plays in the pass game. They've done it. We've seen it. I mean, we talked about this. Notre Dame had 3 guys with over 100 yards receiving in the bowl game against Oklahoma State, a team that had allowed 1 player in the 13 previous games to go for 100 yards. One of them was a running back, Chris Tyree. We've seen Logan Diggs make plays in the pass game. So I don't think that's going to be an issue at all. And they don't have Avery Davis this spring. We know what Avery Davis can do.
And he was catching balls off the jug machine today. Right. He was going through FSA, but he was not in pads. He was just wearing his jersey.
He'll be back by the fall.
Oh, so, yeah.
So you talk about expectations, good. Vince. And to me, I don't think – look, they got to prove it. And the conversation I want to have is not so much about what we're predicting is going to happen, but what should the expectation be? And I think it's finally time that Notre Dame fans start demanding more from the offense.
Sure.
And start getting excited for it. That's the difference. Because the reality is the offense has not been the offense has not played to its potential for a long time. And a lot of it has had to do with just overall offensive philosophy. And so I think that's gone. I think combined with what we saw late in the year last year when you and I both know Brian Kelly had basically checked out.
Yep, no question.
When you look at what we've seen this spring, there's no reason for me to think that this offense shouldn't be expected to be a much better offense next year. And when you look at this past year, and this is the thing I try to get across to buddies of mine when we have this conversation, I'm like, if y'all look at Notre Dame last year and you look at what they did with all the issues they had, Notre Dame last year ranked 19th in scoring. 19th in scoring at 35.2 points per game. Now, that's a little bit inflated because they had a few extra defensive scores compared to other teams. They had
That's true.
4 defensive scores last year. They had 2 against Wisconsin and then 2 against Georgia, 1 against Navy, or 2 against Navy, or 1 against Navy, 1 against Georgia Tech. Or was it 2 against Georgia Tech? There's 2 against Georgia Tech because you had Jack Kaiser had to pick, and then Myron had the long return.
That's right.
I just can't remember if Myron's was against Navy or Georgia Tech. Those 2 games kind of bleed together.
It was the last game of the
uniforms look so similar.
It's whichever one the last game of the season.
Okay, then it was Georgia Tech.
Okay,
the last
it was senior day. It was senior day.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So you had 2 defensive touchdowns against Wisconsin. You had 2 defensive touchdowns against. Or no, you had 1 defensive touchdown. Wait a minute. Did you have 2 defensive touchdowns against Wisconsin? Jack Kaiser had 1 against Wisconsin, and then you had obviously the kick return. See, I'm gonna have to look this up.
The kick return was against Wisconsin. There was 2 pick sixes. I thought
that's what I thought about. In my head, I can't remember what the second pick 6 was. I remember Kevin. I remember Jack Kaiser's. Oh, yeah. Drew White. Drew White had 1 at the end of the game. That's right. I couldn't remember the third. So you had 3 non-offensive touchdowns that game. You had 2 non-offensive touchdowns against Georgia Tech. So that's going to bring you down a tad, although some of those
Sure.
teams have, but still, you scored 35 points this year with a crap offensive line,
Well, yeah.
with a quarterback situation where your quarterback never really got comfortable till the second half of the year. Yeah, had a great first game and then got banged up, had his finger knocked out of socket, offensive line was junk and all that kind of stuff. And then you fast forward to the end of the year and you see how well it performed. You look at the receiving core and how poorly coached it was. And there just was so many different things. You're like, all those things were true, and yet Notre Dame still went out this year and scored 35 points a game, and which is the second highest that Notre Dame has had under Brian Kelly.
Which is crazy to me that last year's offense was that.
Right. They scored more points per
Right.
game than the 2017 offense. They scored more points per game than the 2015 offense, which was a phenomenal offense. Now, again, if you give that team maybe 5, but see, the 2015 team had some non-traditional touchdowns as well. I remember you had Andrew Trombetti's touchdown against Wake Forest that year. They had a kick return for a touchdown by C.J. Sanders that year. He had at least a couple special teams kick returns that year. So it's not like they were all offense that year.
Right.
So you look at it, Vince, it's like as bad as things were at times last year, this offense still went out and scored points.
Yeah.
And still was able to do what it needed to do despite huge problems.
Well,
and that's why, to me, expectations should be super high.
And my expectation, like I guess this is like, maybe this is a bold statement. I don't know, but my expectation is that the offense carries this team this year. And that we haven't been able to say that in a really long time.
Explain that by carry it, because I might have to disagree with you a little bit on that.
You can absolutely disagree with me. What I'm saying is all of the deficiencies that this offense had last year, I believe are going to be fixed this year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's number one. So we're talking offensive line. We're talking poor coaching at wide receiver. I believe both of those will be fixed. I also believe that the play calling is going to be better.
I get where you're coming. I mean, why do you,
I'm getting there. I'm getting
the carrying part.
I'm getting there. So in the past, the defense was on the field. They were carrying, the defense carried the team, right? When the offense would screw up, the defense would have to pick them up, make a big stop, and win the game. I think it's the opposite this time. I think
you think the defense is going to struggle?
Not struggle. I think the offense is going to take a step past.
Okay, but see, I guess my thing is that's not carrying like, to me, what you just said was the defense had to carry the team because the offense wasn't playing to its potential. So I think when one unit's carrying the other, it usually means to me that the other unit's not playing to its potential.
Okay, well, that's not what I'm saying.
Are you saying this, Vince? That you think the best unit this team is going to have this year is going to be the offense?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. That is what and maybe
not
carrying wasn't the right term.
No,
but
I think understand where I'm coming from.
You're going to be able to put the offense on the field to win a game. You're going to be able, hey, we need to either grind it out, we need to possess the ball, we need to do these things, and not the manner in which they did it like, you know what I mean. What I'm saying is the offense
we're on the same page now.
To do.
Yeah, we're on the same page now.
Yeah.
But see, that's what you need to be a championship team.
Absolutely.
You have to be that. I mean,
I think the defense is going to be able to count on the offense to do what it needs to do.
Which then allows you defensively to take more chances and be more aggressive. And all that. Because if you give up a big play, you have the offense and you go back
and they're going to score points.
But that should be the expectation. Will it be that? See, I'm not ready to be in prediction mode yet, Vince, because my brain just doesn't work quite that way yet.
Sure.
I'm still in coach mode where we're still in developmental phase. But taken away from that, the reality is, Vince, there's too much talent for this offense not to be a better team. And whether it's 38 or we have people saying 42, that's not so much my focus. Like, yes, I'd like to see them. I mean, 40 is kind of that magic number. But for me, it still boils down to, can you move the ball and score in the big games?
Right.
Because when I look at the schedule this year, the offense has to play that way. They're not going to beat Ohio State 24-21. They're just not. It's not going to happen. I mean, we talked about this last year. Ohio State in their 2 losses scored 28 and 27 points.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to score. I mean, that's
you have to be able to score. We've talked about that a bunch of times. If you can't score, you're not going to win a championship.
Right.
Championship teams can put points on the board. Period.
Right.
Notre Dame can't do. I shouldn't say can't. They haven't done that in big games in the past.
Right.
They need to be able to do that. And I think they've got the personnel. I think they've got the coaching. I think they got the play calling, and they've got the quarterback to be able to do that. I really do believe that.
Right. So that to me is the expectation, and I think one of the reasons I expect it too is because they were a little bit one dimensional this year. There at times it was. I mean, they just couldn't run the ball that
Sure.
well, and they
Right.
never were really great at running the football.
And they have to be able to do that. They
Right.
have to be. You can't just sit back there and sling it all over the field.
Right.
That
They're
and
not
you
they're
shouldn't
not going
have
to
to
beat the
do
best
that.
teams like that. I mean,
No.
you have to be able to run the ball. So I mean, I think I'm at the point now, Vince, when I look at the offense, that needs to be the expectation. And the reason I want to what I'm trying to do here, Vince, to be honest with you, is I'm trying to deprogram Notre Dame fans
Yeah.
because no matter what you feel about Brian Kelly, even people who didn't like Brian Kelly were programmed to lower the bar.
Yes.
Like there's a guy in our poster and I'm in our chat, and I'm not calling him out because I love him. Chief Brody, great contributor to the site. But like we were having a conversation last week, and he was like, I think they're going to lose this game and that game because they're replacing this. And I'm like, you said the same thing last year because you convinced yourself that they're going to lose this game, this game, this game, this game because of two things. One, the media overhyped some teams on the schedule.
Yep.
And they underhyped Notre Dame. Remember that clown from ESPN? What's his name? The guy that does all the analytics, and he was like, Notre Dame's going to be a 7-5 team.
Oh
He
yeah.
just laughed like, "Are you guys on drugs?"
That was hilarious. And then the line got set at 8.5 or something like that.
And the reason that I bring up Chief Brody is because he's a great guy, right? Like, so I'm bringing him up, but it's like it's the BK conditioning of lowering the bar, lowering the expectation, so that way when Notre Dame achieved what it should have achieved, it can look how phenomenal of a coaching job I did.
Right.
It's all part of the mental games that he played on people. It's like lower the bar, so that way when you do what you do, it looks like you accomplish this great thing. And I'm tired of that. And Marcus Freeman's not doing that. Tommy Rees doesn't do that. And Notre Dame fans need to not be that way anymore too, where we sit there and we talk about, well, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. I'm worried about this. Hey, look, Notre Dame folks, Notre Dame's not the only team in the country that lost players. Notre Dame's not the only team. And this is the funny thing about last year. Georgia had the same number of returning starters last year as Notre Dame had.
But you never heard
There was only two teams last year in the NFL draft that had more players drafted than Notre Dame, who had 9. Georgia was one of them. And they went out and won a title, right? And so, because you didn't hear Kirby making excuses the way that the previous coach at Notre Dame did. And so that's what I'm trying to do here is like, look, we can be excited about this team and still say there's things that they got to prove.
Absolutely.
And they do have to prove certain things, but so does every other team. Bama's got some dudes they got to replace. They got to prove they can go have a great offense without John Mechie and Jamison Williams and Evan Neal and guys like that. But you know what? You're not going to hear Nick Saban be like, well, we lost this game and lost that game. No. And Notre Dame fans shouldn't be that way either, because I'm going to tell you something right now, folks. That's not the head coach you have anymore at Notre Dame.
Nope.
You do not have a head coach at Notre Dame anymore that's going to be talking down the team and talking about how great of a coaching job he's doing behind the scenes to reporters. He's not going to be getting on the phone with Brian Driscoll like, hey, man, why don't you tamp down expectations a little bit, to do this, do that, and the other thing. And then I go run with it. I'm like, you got the wrong guy. Click. You know what I mean? So,
wrong number.
That's just, but that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so, that's the thing that kind of gets you fired up. But that's what I'm trying to get people to understand is like, we need to change the expectations. Like we need to be willing to say, hey, look, it's okay to say they have a chance to be really good, and I expect them to be there. There's nothing wrong with that. And we should, this is Notre Dame, folks. That's what we should be expecting. And Notre Dame has recruited well enough in recent years, because the one thing Ryan and I were talking about the other day is when you look at especially the 21 offensive recruiting class, it's filled with highly ranked players. And those guys all played last year. And I'm a little confused why some fans aren't more. And I know why, because I had enough conversations. People say like, well, look, like there was a lot of negativity on the message board the last couple of days. And I had to kind of, squash. I say, look, it's okay to not be positive, and you don't have to think that everything is like, you ever watch I know you've seen it. You have kids, the Lego movie.
Oh, yeah.
Song, everything is awesome. Right?
Everything is awesome.
Don't need to be that way on our site. Like, we're not going to be that site. Like, it would be so hypocritical for me to say, don't criticize people. That's bullcrap. We're going to do that. But just the negativity is like, because what it is, when things don't go quite our way as fans, we immediately go to, here we go again.
Yep.
Because that's what you were conditioned to believe the last 30 years. And partly because one group of coaches just sucked, right? And then the coach that didn't suck, the guy that's been here for the last 12 years, didn't suck, but he also had this lowering the bar thing, which, he spent 12 years doing, which bothers the crap out of me. So we can be excited about this. It's okay to be excited about this. It's okay to say, hey, look, we should expect Notre Dame to go out there this year and score.
Yeah.
We should expect Notre Dame to go out this year and be able to go toe to toe offensively with Ohio State. And because we were having this conversation the other day, it was like with somebody on Twitter, and it was like, I don't know if I'm like, Utah hung a 45 spot up on Ohio State. I hear all these Notre Dame fans losing their minds about giving up 30-some points to Oklahoma State, and they should, because that was a terrible game. But that's still 8 points fewer than what Ohio State gave up to Utah. The juggernaut quarterback of, was it Cameron Rising, right? I mean, Utah, right? Utah, Vince. I'll say it again.
That I still can't believe is a Power 5 team. Nothing against the Utes, but
well, I mean, they
imagine
to be
them
there,
in the
right?
Pac-12. It's still hard for me.
Right.
You know
but
what
when
I mean?
Urban Meyer was at Utah, they weren't a Power 5 team. They were the Mountain West Conference.
That's what I'm saying.
This is a team that scored 17 points on BYU.
Yeah.
I mean, it was their second highest output of the entire season. They scored more points against Ohio State than they scored against Weber State.
Isn't it Weber?
Weber State, excuse me. Weber State. It just, anyway, they scored 24 points on Washington State. They scored 28 points on Colorado. They hung a 45 spot on Ohio State. And so we have it down here. Just sick of having to sweat games like Toledo. I'm with you.
Absolutely.
But again, as I've tried to say, that is a byproduct of tamping down your expectations.
Right.
That's the problem. The reality is when you lower the bar, you're telling your players, this is the standard for you.
Right.
This is the standard of excellence. And the thing that you all need to understand is when you listen to Mark, when you listen to the players talk, when you talk to them publicly, when you talk to them privately, they will all say, we're being worked harder now than we've ever been worked before. And you know what the response to that is, Vince? They love it. You've been at practices.
Yep.
Tell me the tempo isn't significantly greater than it was in the past.
Not just the tempo, but the overall energy throughout the building.
We would have before they would turn the radio on, it'd be dead silent going through different periods of the practice.
Yep.
Dead silent. Or you'd only hear coaches barking. That was it. I'm listening to the videos, and I'm hearing all this chatter, all this hype, all this talk, and it's genuine. And that's the thing that you hear is like, this is a team that feels that they can be great. Because here's the difference between this team and past teams. This team is being challenged to be great.
Right.
Legitimately challenged. Not do the word talk to the media and then tamp things down, around it. This team is being challenged to be great. And ultimately, that's why I wrote the article I wrote a couple weeks ago about why I think Marcus Freeman's going to win, because I found this out. Like, Brian Kelly had zero relationship with Lou Holtz, and I've known that for a while. Vince, you knew that. Marcus Freeman has sought Lou Holtz out time and again since he got to Notre Dame. He's the D coordinator because he understands it. And one of the things that Lou has always been a believer in is you push the players beyond what they believe they're capable of, because very few players truly believe that like they can be what they actually can be. And that's been the key. And so as fans, that's also our thing too. But the other thing too, Vince, is it's okay to hold them to that standard, because when they don't meet that standard, stop making excuses for why they didn't. There are no more excuses. You can't blame the O-line coach. Can't blame the receivers coach. Can't blame the head coach anymore. It's time to get there. And I'm confident they're going to get there because they have the talent, they have the belief, and I believe they have the system. And I think that's why, we'll get into specifics of the players and stuff moving forward, but I'm sorry. Like, it's time for us as Notre Dame fans to raise the bar of our own expectations, and not because we do what Kelly did. We talk championships, but then we all talk ourselves into why 9-3 is okay.
Right, exactly. And 9-3 is never okay at Notre Dame. I'm sorry.
There's very rare occasions when it's okay. Very few. It's you won a championship. You lost like LSU. You
Everybody.
lost 15 guys in the
Yeah.
NFL.
Or
You're gonna be
everybody gets hurt. I mean,
and you're going to have a couple injuries the next year, right? Okay,
right.
9-3, fine. Okay. But it's rare. It's got to be rare. And that's because I mean, Lou had a couple of years like that, right? Where you're like, they weren't as good as they should have been because they were young and they were coming off a great year and lost a bunch of dudes in the NFL, whatever the case may be. So, Vince, that's where I'm at. Is I just wanted to kind of talk about that because I really felt like I'm hearing a lot more. I'm hearing a lot more sort of the same old from our people, and I just want to fix that because this is a new era for the coaches, a new era for the players, but it needs to be a new era for us as well.
Yeah.
And an era we start demanding excellence and not talking ourselves into why it's going to actually be next year. And then next year we're going to talk about why it's going to be the next year. And then the next year we're going to talk about why it's actually no. It's actually going to be the next year. No, it's time now. I don't want to hear talk about, well, no. 2023 is going to be the year. No, let's focus on 2022.
Exactly.
And let's demand excellence from this team because there are not a lot of teams in college football. You can name them on one hand that can talk about having the kind of running backs that Notre Dame has, the kind of line situation that Notre Dame has, a player like Isaiah Foskey. I had a guy the other day try to tell me, no, Ohio State has a better line than Notre Dame, and didn't say anything to me after I said Isaiah Foskey has more sacks last year than their top 4 returning defensive ends combined. Okay? They don't have a Brandon Joseph, right? I don't think they have a Maris Luafau, and he hasn't even played a whole ton. And I'll take Cam Hart over any corner that Ohio State has. But there's an assumption amongst, and he's a Notre Dame fan. Good guy. It's a good conversation. We just disagreed. He didn't get personal. But it's just like, even then, you've got Notre Dame fans that will just assume that Ohio State's got better players than Notre Dame on defense. Because why? Because 5 years ago, Ohio State was that way.
Right.
It's not the case anymore. 5 years ago, I couldn't name more than 2 or 3 players in Notre Dame that could have started at Ohio State. It'd have been like Jalen Smith. It'd have been Sheldon Day and like, that's it. you know what I mean? Like now it's like, I don't know more than 2 or 3 guys that from Ohio State that I would take. I'd take one of their corners, maybe one of their D tackles, and that's about it. I mean, that's about it. Right. But that's a mindset that we have to embrace at Notre Dame, and Chief Brody, stop calling me out, Brian. You're my guy. You're my guy. But that's just kind of, that to me is where I'm at with this. That's the now just
raise the bar.
Right. No. Brody, the last person I was talking about on Twitter, that was not you. I was not talking about you on that one. But anyway, Vince, that's where I'm at. I think the expectation, we need to expect this to be a top 15 scoring team. We need to expect this to be a top 20 total offense team. And I don't care as much about yards as I care about yards per play. That to me is a better indicator because as I've explained in the past, you can actually not have a ton of yards and be an explosive offense because maybe your defense, your special teams or whatever is giving you great field position. If your average starting field position is the 40, you average 6-7 yards of play, you're going to have fewer yards than a team whose average starting position is the 20 and has 6.7 yards per play, right? If you both go down and score at the same rate. So that's kind of the point behind it is that right there. So Vince, that is going to do it for this part of the show. Anything you'd like to add before you go and we get Ryan on here to do our daily mailbag?
Just remember, April 12th, I said it, the offense. The offense is going to be the part of the team that's going to be the focal point, the studs. So I'm excited.
Yeah. And we have people that are willing to realize it now. I'm a victim to the Kelly syndrome.
See, I'm telling you.
And it's very true. I think there's a lot of people that have kind of bought into that, talking down the program. And then because I think part of me understands it. If I convince myself the team is going to be 8-4 and they go 10-2, then I'm going to be happy. I understand that. And it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
But this is Notre Dame. You should convince yourself they're at least going to be 10-2 and then be happy when they go 12-0. That's how it should be, or 11-1. That's how the standard should be. So Vince, thank you so much for joining the show. Ryan, are you ready to get up in here and get this thing going? So this is Ryan Roberts, obviously our recruiting director of recruiting at Irish Break. I almost got your title wrong. I shouldn't do that since I'm the one that made it up. So our director of recruiting, Ryan Roberts is with us here today for our daily mailbag. Ryan, yet an interesting story today on Cooper Flanagan. I think it was a guy that, when the coaching change happened, there was a little bit of a time where it was looking a little bit nervous because Kelly leaves and then John McNulty leaves and then Bama and LSU come in with offers. And he hadn't been back since the new thing happened, but he got back this weekend, Ryan, and sounds like it went really, really well.
Yeah, I mean, not only was he back this weekend, he also has another trip planned to the future a little bit in June. So Cooper is a player where anytime there is coaching change, right? Like you're going to have to, for a committed player that was already previously committed, they're going to have to reaffirm their commitment. I mean, you're committing to play now for a tight end coach in Jared Parker, who was not the guy that recruited you. Like you said, McNulty is now out. So now he had to kind of reaffirm everything, and he has done that with flying colors. They immediately, and shout out to Coach Freeman and the rest of the staff. I know they went to Coach Parker very quickly after Coach McNulty took the Boston College job, but they made Cooper, it made it known to Cooper very quickly. You are a priority in this class. We need you. We want you a part of this class. Very receptive to that. And he told me, just seeing Coach Parker coach and just having conversations with him and getting into the film room a little bit, it just reaffirmed everything for him. Notre Dame's the place for him. So some easiness at points after the coaching change, obviously, but leaving that conversation with Cooper Flanagan, I don't think any Notre Dame fan should have any worry about whether he is going to be part of this class or not.
And the photo shoot was pretty sweet that they had with him. I love the quote he had in the article with you about how he told himself if they pull out that gold throne, he's not sitting on it. It was hilarious. Because I can just hear my 17-year-old self kind of convincing myself I'm above that, and then I see it, I'm like, I'm gonna sit on it. So relay that story because I thought that was my favorite part of the whole article.
Yeah, I mean, obviously everyone saw the Golden Throne when Dante Moore visited campus, so they pulled the same thing out for Cooper Flanagan. And Cooper, although he's a Cali kid, right, which is kind of like the media at some points, depending on who you are, Cooper is from De La Salle, and he's just kind of a no-nonsense worker type, right? So he was just like, he said before the trip went, before he took the trip, he said, if they pull the throne out, I'm not doing it. It's just, it's not my style, is exactly what he said. Mm-hmm. But then he said once he got there out and he took a seat on, he's like, yeah, all right, this is pretty awesome. I kind of dig this a little bit. So very cool. Even the players that don't typically like that kind of glitz and glamour got something out of the whole Golden Throne. I think it's a great touch, man. I really do like that Golden Throne touch on the recruiting trail.
Agree. I think it's super impressive. Super, super impressive. And I really enjoy that they're doing it. So Ryan, we were having a conversation about Ohio State and Michigan, or Ohio State and Notre Dame, and just the perception and how Notre Dame, you were here, you were listening to it, you were down there. And there was a question that somebody had that, I think points to how the problem is a perception problem. And one of the comments I made was like 5 years ago, there's only like 2 or 3 defensive players that I would have taken from Notre Dame and for Ohio State. It was like Jalen Smith, like maybe Kavari Russell, maybe. Yeah. Maybe Sheldon Day, and that's about it, right? Now it's completely the other way around. And I said I'd probably take Denzel Berkley and start him opposite Cam Hart. I'd probably take one of their interior guys, and that's about it. And I'm not taking any linebackers. I'm not taking, and somebody, and this is one of the responses. What about Zach Harrison? Wouldn't you take him because 5-star player? And here's the response: no, I wouldn't. Now, you could say, well, without Washington coaching him, maybe he'll be better. And that may be true, but we're going off of what they are now. And here's my point. Riley Mills last year, in 270 total snaps, 152 pass rush snaps, according to Pro Football Focus, had 19 quarterback pressures. He had 3 sacks on the season. 270 total snaps, 152 pass rush snaps, right? 3 sacks, 19 pressures. In twice as many total, 558 total snaps, 299 pass rush snaps. Zach Harrison last year had 28 tackles or 28 pressures, 3 sacks. So why would I want to take that guy? And here's the thing. Riley Mills played defensive end for 1 game.
And he's younger. He had
2 sacks in that game. So why would I take him? Other than, well, he was a 5-star and a great talent, and I don't dispute that. But again, I boil it down to the hype about Ohio State is built on it's filled with a bunch of highly ranked guys, but it's been a terrible defense for 4 of the last 5 years. And so Notre Dame has not only been better than Ohio State on defense in the last 4 years, they've been in 3 of the 4 years, they've been significantly better than Ohio State on defense. And that's the thing, Ryan. I think there's this giant perception that Ohio State's got these great players, and they may be talented. They may be highly ranked guys with better coaching. Maybe they will be better. But from what we've seen right now, what we know, how many guys at Ohio State from that team would you take and say, yeah, I got to play at Notre Dame on defense? Offense is a different conversation.
For sure.
Different conversation.
I mean, I would at least take one of the interior defensive linemen, like you mentioned, for at least depth, right? Like Notre Dame has some depth issue right now. That's why they just took the grad transfer from Harvard, Chris Smith. So I would definitely consider that one. Denzel Berk's definitely one that I would like to kind of compete opposite of Cam Hart to see if he can take a starting spot. Only other player, honestly, Brian, I would consider is Ronnie Hickman, the safety for them, just because I think opposite of Brandon Joseph, I think he's a really good player. So I think that he could compete with Ramon Henderson and those guys. And I think he might be the second best safety on the team after Brandon Joseph.
Perhaps. Yeah. The reason I would probably say no is I still think the other guys have a higher ceiling. But the thing about Ronnie Hickman is what you'd be getting from him. That's the thing I would say. You know what you're going to get from him. And he was put in a lot of bad situations last year because of the way the defense was run. I could maybe go with you on that one. I would be willing to have that cover. So that's what, 3?
Yeah. Well, right? I mean, this just reiterates why I like your scouting process for high school players so much, is because you have the current grade and you have the upside grade, right? Like a lot of those players on the defense that I haven't mentioned have high upside, but they just haven't been developed that well over the last couple of years. I mean, Zach Harrison in a vacuum is on par with Isaiah Foskey from a talent perspective, but he has not been Isaiah Foskey. I mean, Steele Chambers is a very athletic player, but he's played just a handful of games at the linebacker position. And we have to see how he develops. Denzel Berkley, like you said, even Sevin Banks, who's no longer on the team, he was a guy that was extremely talented, but he just wasn't developed. So there's a development that needs to happen in recruiting. It's not just about getting talent. You also have to have coaches that are able to get the best out of them. And honestly, they just haven't done that well at Ohio State on the defensive side of the football anyway.
Sorry, I just saw that Jabron Payne, the running back, 2022 running back from Ohio, announced that he is going to be making his commitment known on April 15th at 3:00 Eastern. That is a Friday, correct? I'm trying to look at my calendar. 13, 14, 15. Yeah, that'd be Friday at 3:00. So we won't talk a whole lot about Jabron Payne other than the fact that we'll have I don't know if he's from talking to him the other day, it doesn't sound like he's got anything planned video wise. He's just going to put some up on social media. So what we'll do is we'll have a show after he makes his decision. We'll have a show breaking down that decision wherever he chooses and talk about what it means for Notre Dame. So we will definitely have that. And Ryan now knows the first thing he's going to be working on once this show is over is getting a story ready to preview that. So,
yep.
So I think, Ryan, that's kind of where I come from is the whole point of is it's time to raise the expectations. If you believe that Marcus Freeman is that guy, if you believe the staff he put together was a good staff, if you believe that, these things are true, then it's time to start expecting those things and not convincing ourselves that, 9-3 is okay. And then that way you're happy if they go 10-2 or 11-1. It's time to say, no, it's time to hold this team to the standard of what is the best this team can be. And even with the schedule, I'm sorry, this is not a team that should be 9-3. There's too much talent. And the interesting part was the offense. Last year was the second best scoring offense Notre Dame has had since Brady Quinn was the starting quarterback at Notre Dame. And yet with all the problems that they had, and I don't expect those problems to still exist this year, Ryan. I just think a lot of those things are going to be gone. I really do. And I don't think losing Kevin Austin is like this move that, oh my gosh, Notre Dame can't be able to photo ball this year because they lost Kevin Austin and because they don't have Jack Cohn. I just, I think it's going to look different. And we'll have some conversations this offseason about what the offense is going to look like. A Jack Cohn run offense is not going to look like a Tyler Buckner run offense in many ways. Doesn't mean it's going to be better. Doesn't mean it's going to be worse. We'll talk about those things. But I just think overall, I expect this to be a more talented top to bottom football team because the skill last year was really good, but the line was bad. This year, they should be really good in both areas. And that's when I say talent. It's not just looking at the skill players. You got to look at all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it comes down to development, right? I mean, we can talk about all this upside that we want with some of this recruiting side of things, but if you don't have the coaches in place to tap into that potential, that's why, we talked about a lot about Charles Jagasaw on yesterday's show. This is why I'm so intrigued by the upside piece of Charles Jagasaw, is because I trust a guy like Harry Heastand to get the most out of him. So, and I think that the excuse that there's a talent deficiency from Notre Dame comparative to some of the other elite teams in college football, that thing's just becoming far and far just more of a lie. It's not something that's real anymore. It's not, like you just said, comparing Ohio State to Notre Dame. There's 2 to 3 guys on the defense that you would take maybe to come over and play for Notre Dame right now. So I think that speaks volumes to it. And obviously there's a couple other programs like Alabama and Georgia that are on a higher tier right now than in Ohio State, but still Ohio State has been a consistently good football team, playoff contending team over the last several years. So it's an interesting kind of comparison, especially because it's the location of the two schools too, right? Because we want to see Notre Dame, in order to take a big step, they have to be the place in the Midwest, right? Like they have to be the 100%. Spots. So
yes,
Ohio State is obviously the easy one that you look to and say that team has had some very nice moments in the Midwest. You have to kind of overtake them as the unquestioned number 1 team in the
You can't be the best team in the nation if you're not the best team in the region. I mean, it's simple as that. I mean, now, and this doesn't mean necessarily climbing them this season. The point is to get to Bama and Georgia, you have to first get past Ohio State, right? And I'm more talking like, obviously this year it's even more practical because they play. But even if they didn't play this year, it's not just like you got to be ranked higher than them, but it's also it's about recruiting, it's about all those type of things. And that's kind of where we're coming from on that, is you got to get past Ohio State first. And obviously on the field's part of it, it's a recruiting's part of it, but it's about expectations. I mean, the coach last year, Ryan Day last year, they went 11-2. They lost to a playoff team and they lost to a Utah team that was a good team, right? Utah was a really good team. They just shouldn't have hung 45 up on them. That's my whole point. Utah's a good football team. They blasted Oregon twice, who beat Ohio State. The point is they shouldn't have hung 45 on them. That was every bit as bad, if not worse, than Notre Dame giving up 37 to Oklahoma State, in my opinion. And that's the point I'm making. Now, Ohio State's going to be a great team because their offense is going to be exceptional, in my opinion, this year. One of the best quarterbacks in the country, one of the best running backs in the country. And yes, I know they lost some players, but their receiving core is still going to be really good. And as disappointing as their line has been, they haven't been a bad offensive line at all. I mean, they are not Clemson. They're just not as good as they should have been, in my view. And so that's what we're talking about. It's more of looking at the defense versus the defense is really what it comes down to. And then it ties into why shouldn't we expect Notre Dame to move the ball and score on Ohio State? What from Ohio State have we seen that would make you think that this is a team that should go out there and just beat Notre Dame the way that they did a few years ago? I don't think they're that team anymore, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, since you did the how many players would you take from the Ohio State defense, should we do the offensive side of the football, Brad, or do we not want to go there?
No, we can go there. I mean, look, because that's a little bit of a different conversation, right? Sure. Like now, I'm taking their quarterback. I personally think Tyler Buckner maybe have a more impactful player down the road, because I always like guys that can run. I think they add an element, and CJ Stroud is allergic to running. I would take here's the interesting one, right? I would take their starting running back. I would take Notre Dame's backfield.
That's fair.
I would take Notre Dame's running back. If it was, I can only have Trayvon Henderson, I'm taking him a heartbeat. If it was, you got to trade the entire backfield, I wouldn't do it. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't disagree, because I know, I mean, you have Trayvon Henderson, then you have Myjan Williams, right?
Like Myjan, I'm not
sure. Myjan Williams. Yeah, I mean, he's a tough, good second back, but I mean, when you take into account that Notre Dame's
Crowley, Evan Pryor, I'm not taking those guys over Notre Dame's guys.
Right. Well, I was going to say Jadarian Price right now looks like he might be the 4th-string running back. So, I mean, that kind of just puts it in the context.
Yeah. And I love I love Dallin Hayden. I think Jadarian Price passed him as a senior, but Dallin Hayden's a really good player. I think a reasonable person can make an argument that I'd still rather have Ohio State's backfield. And I wouldn't argue with them. I mean, I just my preference, and maybe that's the nerd. But the point is, it's not an absurd take, where a couple years ago, it'd have been a stupid take. like you're an idiot. Like you're a total homer by saying that.
Mhm.
Receiving core, it's not close right now. With all due respect, Lorenzo Styles, I mean, they've got 3 of him, like that kind of player, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'm taking Jackson Smith and Jigba. I'm sorry, and I'm putting him into the boundary and letting him go do his thing, right? Some of those other guys, I'm taking one of the. I would say if I could start an ideal starting 3 of the 2 teams, I'd probably have one Notre Dame guy in there. I'd probably have Lorenzo in the slot, but that's it.
Marvin Harrison Jr. on the outside over there.
Yeah, he'd be
too.
my boundary probably. I'd have Jackson outside at X. That'd probably be my starting lineup. Or I'd have a Mecca maybe, and you'd make an argument for him too. But yeah, just Lorenzo's the only guy right now that's there for me. Now, do I think Tobias Merriweather in a year is going to have a chance to be in that conversation? You better believe it. But he's not on campus yet, and he's just a freshman. Tight end, not close. It's Notre Dame.
Not close. I don't even know who's. I mean, who did they have? I mean, G. Scott is their tight end now. I guess.
Right. They moved him. Yeah. They're pretty good there. Offensive line. Here's the interesting one. Would you take either one of their tackles?
No.
Okay.
No.
Now, here's what I would do.
I wouldn't mind. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say maybe getting DeJuan Jones and then moving Blake Fisher inside, but like that would be my only.
I'd rather move DeJuan Jones inside. I think Blake moves better in space.
Yeah, but he's just 6'8" leverage. Yeah,
that's why I don't want him. Now,
fair.
I'm not gonna lie, I do kind of think about what would he be like being coached for Harry Hiestand? But he's not being coached by Harry Hiestand at Ohio State, and that's the point. I would take Jarrett Patterson over Luke Whippler. Now, here's what I would do. I wouldn't mind keeping Paris Johnson at guard. Now, they're going to kick him out to tackle at Ohio State, and I would not take him over Joe Alt or Blake Fisher. But if I could keep him where he played last year, which is a guard, I would be more I'd be more prone to that. I would like to have Paris Johnson as a guard at Notre Dame. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Yeah. Well, I think if I was making an interior off of the 2 rosters, honestly, I would probably take Patterson. I know I'm getting like super out of the box creative with this one, but I might put Patterson at guard, take Whippler, put him at center, and then put Paris Johnson at the other guard. Like that might be my conversation piece.
I'd be open to that.
Whippler's a good player. Obviously, he's not Jared Patterson, but he's a good player.
He is a good player. And I think I actually think he would fit better at Notre Dame than he is at Ohio State because they like the bigger movers, and he's more of an athletic, get to the second level kind of guy. So I think he'd even be better at Notre Dame. He fits better in Notre Dame than I think he would fit in what they do at Ohio State. So again, Ohio State, a lot more guys like that. That I would take on offense. But again, okay, so we said, okay, so you take 3 Notre Dame offensive linemen, right? You take Michael Mayer, and you take Lorenzo Styles. So if you combine those 2 teams, you're taking 5 offensive players from Notre Dame, and you're taking 6 guys from Ohio State, right? Defensively, it's a different conversation. 2 for sure from Ohio State we would take. 3rd, we'd have a debate on. But that's it. Right. And so, again, the talent gap is not what people may. There's one spot where there's a huge gap right now. Right now, there's one spot where there's a huge gap, and that's quarterback because CJ Stroud has proven it and Tyler Buchner hasn't. But here's the point I wanted to make, Ryan. Do you name me the best pass that you saw? This is a trick question, and I know you know the answer to it. What was the best pass CJ Stroud threw as a true freshman at Ohio State?
Oh, he didn't throw a pass during his freshman year at Ohio State. True freshman year, anyway. Yeah. I thought you were asking about this past year. I was like, he threw a pretty awesome fade route against Utah in the right corner of the end zone.
He had several really good throws this year. The point being, he had 0. He came. This was a sophomore year, right? Ohio State did not say, "Well, CJ, you're a redshirt freshman. You didn't play a ton as a freshman." Kid came into this year with 0 career pass attempts and was a Heisman finalist. Right. And that's the whole point is stop lowering the bar. Now, is it going to look different for Tyler Buchner? Yes, it's going to look different. But should we expect Tyler Buchner to still be an impact player? Yes. I don't know why. It's like some Notre Dame fans have convinced themselves that Tyler Buchner is going to be Brandon Wimbush from 2017. Number one, that was the best offensive stretch of football we've seen since Brady Quinn was a quarterback. Like the best. Like just week after week after week stretch we saw was 2017 from the second half of BC to Wake Forest. with the only blip being the North Carolina game because Wimbush didn't play. But even then, they still scored 30-some points in the rain, right? That was, I mean, you scored 49 on an 11-win USC team. You went on the road and scored 38, and it's 31 offensively because they had a defensive touchdown in that game. But you had 31 points and moved the ball, ran for 180 yards on the number 2 rush defense in the country, Michigan State. You know, you hung over 500 rushing yards on Boston College, who had multiple NFL players on that defense, right? I mean, you had over 700 yards of offense against Wake Forest. I mean, it's just week after week. You ran for over 300 yards against an NC State front seven that had 5 of its front 7 players get drafted because you have Jermaine Pratt, who started in the freaking Super Bowl this past year. Then you had 4 defensive linemen that all got picked in the 4th round or higher, including a defensive end that went number 5 overall to the Broncos and Bradley Chubb.
Yeah.
And Notre Dame ran for over 300 yards on that team. Right. So, I mean, if they're going to repeat that offense, cool. But I'm sorry, Tyler Buchner is not Brandon Wimbush. He's going to be a better thrower. And I'm sorry, I'm going to take this receiving core over that receiving core. I just will. You know, I'll take this tight end over that tight end. And I don't think this running back group takes a backseat to that running back group either, in my opinion. So I just don't know why people have convinced themselves, Ryan, why Tyler Buchner just can't throw the football. I mean,
because they haven't seen it. That's why.
Right.
I mean,
but even if he's just the guy he was last year, that's still better than what Brandon Wimbush was in 2017.
It's fair.
I mean, Brandon completed 49% of his passes. Tyler last year completed 60% of his passes as a true freshman. That was Brandon Wimbush's 3rd year in college. So I guess that's kind of where I come from. I just don't quite understand why the bar, and I really believe it's the BK syndrome. It's just don't get too excited because you don't want to get let down again.
Well, I mean, it happens. I mean, from the fan goggle perspective for a second, I don't know how many times during the Baron Kelly era I tried to talk to my dad and convince myself, like, oh, I think this year's different. I think this is different. Like, I mean, it happened just 2 years ago, right? When they after they beat Clemson, I was like, oh, I think this one's different, man. This just feels a little bit different. And then you get let down. And I don't blame fans for feeling that way because I have felt that way. Like I have literally felt that way. And again, I am 30 years old, so I wasn't around the last time they won a championship. So like I've never felt it. So all I know is I don't want to say disappointment because Notre Dame has had moments of being a good football team. Like it hasn't all been bad, but I mean, I have been during the Notre Dame era where you're just kind of living off of memories, right? Like the memories haven't been made as much. Like you just remember a game here and there. Like you don't remember a full season of context for the most part because there's some disappointment at some point. So I don't blame fans for feeling that way, man. It's tough to get out of that void, to be honest. But hopefully you come out soon.
It's time to get out of it. I mean, that's my thing. It's time to raise the bar and enjoy the ride. You know, and Old Grim with a super chat. Thank you, Old Grim. Good to see you in the chat today. It all falls to quarterback play. And this was from an earlier conversation, but yes, I mean that at the end of the day, though, if Notre Dame's going to be the offense it needs to be, Tyler Buchner does need to be a version of himself. I don't expect this to be the best version of Tyler Buchner. He's going to be a redshirt freshman or excuse me, a sophomore, but he should still be a good player. And by midseason, really be hitting his stride. But I don't think we should just, expect them not to be great early. Tyler Buchner's played in some high leverage situations. Tyler Buchner's had failures in high leverage situations as well, which I say that with a smile on my face, because when you're as good as he was in high school and you're as dominant as he was in high school, the game of football can seem super easy. I mean, he had 81 touchdowns as a junior in high school, right? It's just absurd. You know, it's like when I hear people say, Chris Vezina, I'm like, Tyler Buchner rushed for almost as many yards as Chris Vezina passed for as a junior in high school, right? I mean, it's absurd. And he rushed for more touchdowns than Chris Vezina passed for. And he also threw for 4,500 yards and 58 touchdowns. I feel like the Cincinnati struggles, the second half of Virginia Tech, like the second quarter was like, that's what Tyler Buchner can be, right? Running all over, beautiful go route to Kevin Austin. Reads it out, hits that backside seam to Avery Davis, And then Virginia Tech said, okay, let's mix up our coverages. And he wasn't ready for it. And then we saw the bad version in the second half. But that's part of the growing process.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, they went to a ton of different zone looks in that second half, right? Like I remember
squatting the coverage. Yeah.
Right. That interception he threw into the boundary against Jermaine Waller.
Corner just rolled down.
Him, man. Yeah. It was nothing super complex. It's just something different that he hadn't seen, like the worst thing, not the worst thing, but one of the worst things that you can do with a guy like a Tyler Buchner, a young quarterback like that, who can also run, is play a ton of man coverage against him. You're making things very easy, very simplistic, and you're putting your back to a really gifted athlete, right? Like I don't want to do that. So mix up the coverage was and give Virginia Tech some credit. Very smart decision to kind of switch things up. But I mean, that's going to be some of the negatives that you're going to get from time to time because he hadn't been a kid that hadn't played in 2 years.
Right.
Like it's the facts about it.
And he wasn't prepared that week to be the guy. He replaced a quarterback that was struggling and it was banged up. I mean, that's the reality of it. And so, because that was the week after the Cincinnati game, correct? If I remember correctly, I think it was a week after the Cincinnati game. And
yeah. Because there's a lot of quarterback controversy at that point.
And Jack Cohn was still trying to come back from the injury he suffered against Wisconsin. And so Tyler wasn't prepared. So another thing that is interesting is I've talked to some people that apparently the defense is still in we're going to see a lot more zone from what I understand from the defense this year than we did in the past. Which is further evidence that Al Golden's going to be allowed to run this defense because Marcus Freeman's a man guy. He is a man guy. I mean, there's no question about it. I think part of it is that I think Al Golden I think every coach would like to be able to play man. I think every defensive coach likes to be able to play man. It's just, you got to know your personnel and be like, we don't have a lot of man guys. We don't have man cover guys. I mean,
I always talk. I mean, it's very simple, man. Like, especially even predicting for like the NFL draft for a second. I remember I talked to a secondary coach at a smaller school, and I just asked him about a defensive back that he had coming out. I think he's actually in this draft this year. And I asked, like, what's the perception for the scouts coming through, Brian? And he literally said, oh, he's a man cover corner. He's like, scouts don't come to see zone corners, like to your point, every defensive coordinator wants to be aggressive. Like they would love to just blitz all day. In order to blitz a lot, playing man coverage is the easiest way to kind of figure out those blitz packages. So to your point, yes, every defensive coordinator wants to blitz. And we have seen Marcus Freeman, at least on his side of things, like when he was at Cincinnati, he had a couple lockdown corners. So like he could afford to do that. And he could send a variety of blitzes. I mean, there would be some zone drops at points, but like for the most part, they're playing cover one or they're playing 2-man, and they are just blitzing all over the place. Get that extra defender in the box. So I really love the kind of fundamentals to it. I look forward to seeing the new wrinkles though with Coach Golden because he has been at places where maybe the defensive talent wasn't to the degree that he could be afford to do that. I mean, when he was at Temple, they used to mix things up all the time because they just didn't have the dudes outside. And honestly, if they don't improve the quarterback spot on the opposite of Cam Hart, you have to wonder if he'll be super comfortable all the time to play a ton of man. So I'm interested to see that layer of Coach Golden, to see how aggressive he is. What does his coverage look like? That's the layer that I don't really know yet, and I'm looking forward to finding out.
I think, too, that what that is doing is that is helping the offense. And it's helping Tyler Buchner. Because we've heard, like, the defense, the one thing the defense has been able to do this spring is force turnovers. They're giving up big plays and all that, but they force turnovers. And it goes back to what we were originally talking about, Ryan, with the Virginia Tech thing is, you're facing a lot of man in practice. And Virginia Tech was playing more man early because that was the key to beating Notre Dame with Jack Cohn, right? Is you press the corners, you throw off the timing. Like Wisconsin, Cincinnati, and Purdue had already like laid the groundwork for that, right? Like this is how you slow down Notre Dame. Press the corners, don't let them beat you, that kind of thing. And then Buchner comes out and smokes you on his first play, just beat you over the top with a go route, and you're like, yeah, we're not gonna do that anymore, right? And he had a really good first half, picked them apart, do a touchdown pass, hit the back seam, and then they came a second half. So we're gonna mix up, we're gonna show off coverage, squat down. Those are things you do to a young cornerback. Well, he's seeing that this whole spring from the Notre Dame defense. And I think that's going to be a benefit to him definitely as well. Toe Jam with a super chat. Thank you, Toe Jam. Sorry if you discussed already. Seems like the offense had been hesitant in going to the jugular from time to time over the last few years. If you think that is true, was it due to BK or Reese? Look, that was a BK thing because I always say if you want to evaluate things about Tommy Reese, then you evaluate things that are different from the way they were before. And to me, this has been a Brian Kelly problem for years. It's funny, Ryan, the other night, I was watching talking about Al Golden. I was watching the Sun Bowl from 2010. And obviously, it's kind of interesting. This was Brian Kelly's first year. Tommy Reese was a freshman quarterback on the team. So it's just kind of funny how things come full circle. They interviewed Al Golden during the game because he'd been named the head coach. It's just the interim Jeff Stoutland was the head coach for the game. They'd fired Randy Shannon and all that stuff. It was just kind of funny. But Notre Dame was up 27-0 at halftime and won 33-17. That was just BK
coasting
at his finest. I mean, it was like you're up 27-0. You come out, and really it could have been worse because they jumped on them quick. They didn't score a ton in as much in the second quarter. And that was just the way it always was. And the problem is, it's not about running it up. It's a mentality. It's a mentality of when you're on the football field, you're giving it everything you got for 60 minutes. And if you want to not score 100 points on a team, then put your second stringers in the game early and let them run the offense. But it's a mentality of, okay, we did well. Let's not blow it. Let's not lose the game. And I think that was a mentality that Brian Kelly had. And you can't turn that switch on and off, Ryan. That's just who you are, and that's who this team was. And so, yes, that's a BK thing. Now, will Marcus Freeman fix that? I don't know. That's always my biggest concern with defensive coaches. Always. And look, Nick Saban made a career early on at Alabama of winning 17-14 games. I mean, some of the biggest games they had were low-scoring games. I mean, I still remember the Tennessee game where Terrence Cody blocked 3 kicks in a 7th. I think wasn't Lane Kiffin was the head coach, I think, on that team. And just that's probably my only question about Marcus Freeman. Is he going to let this team? Will he let the offense be dynamic and explosive? That's the question they have. And that's not a Marcus Freeman thing, Ryan. I would ask that question of every single defensive coached football team. That's always the thing that holds defensive coaches from biggest problem Vic Fangio had in Denver. He wanted to try to win every game 17-14. And you can't do that anymore, man. You can't do it.
No, times have changed, to say the least. I mean, I can't tell you how many games I've watched with Notre Dame where even when they would put backups in at times, like a backup quarterback, the offense just changed so much. It was just run, boring. But I'm just like, can you just run your offense? I'm not asking you to take deep shots and be disrespectful in that regard, but why are you changing who you are in those types of moments? So that's the frustrating part. I feel good about it as much as I can feel good about it. Like you said, until we see it, you don't really actually know. But it seems like for the most part, and you could disagree if you want, but I feel like in my perspective, in my vantage point, Marcus Freeman's just, obviously he's the CEO, right? It's his name on everything. But I feel like he's kind of saying Tommy Reese, this is your show, right? I'm not going to put shackles on you. I'm not going to force you to do something that you don't want to do. I'm going to let you be your head coach of the offense. And obviously you answer to me, and I will, I kind of take the, I don't want to say the blame, but it is my product, obviously. So I'm going to have my input to it, but I'm not going to step on toes. So I feel like it's a good sign moving forward. But like you said, you don't really know until it's actually tangible and it's an understandable thing.
Some of the stuff going on in the chat right now is just hilarious. There's a Notre Dame fan literally almost wishing that Notre Dame will lose so that he can come back and rub it in people's face that he doesn't think they're going to be good this year.
I read the very pessimistic thing. I saw it. Yeah.
Okay. Whatever works. John A1, what's Josh Burnham's ceiling as an edge player? How difficult is getting raw recruits ready for D-line play? So if you're on the message board, you know what John's referring to. If you're not on the message board, then you missed the update we had. What was it? Friday? Did it go up Friday night or was it Saturday? Whatever the 9th was.
Sounds like, somewhere around there.
Saturday. That Josh Burnham has been moved to Viper because he has already over 230 pounds. And the feeling is that by the time, the way that he has kind of grown since he got to Notre Dame, that he's going to be 250 by the time the fall comes. He's basically just he's going to outgrow linebacker a lot faster than they thought. And they love his athleticism and his size, but there's a need there. And the reality is he's just gotten too big. And it's good weight. If you look at him, Sean or Ryan, he still looks thin. Right. That's the scary thing. We've seen, you've seen him up close personal. He doesn't necessarily look like he's over 230 pounds, which When you're a coach, you have to say, if he's already 230 plus now, and he looks like that, and he's gained this much since he got, because I think he was like 215 when he arrived. He's gained 20 pounds. He's still super twitchy, and he still looks skinny. He's going to be 260 in no time. I think that's the decision that they made is that. So I'll set the premise, Ryan. I'll allow you to give the first answer in regards to specifically, what is his ceiling as an edge player?
I mean, personally, I love the move. I really do. When I saw it, I was like, well, that's intriguing. Because, I mean, it's always in the back of your mind a little bit because you're like, this kid's 6'4" with vines, right?
He's so
like
long. Yeah.
He's long everywhere. And I saw him up in close and personal. I'm like, that kid looks like Myjai Sanders, like just from a body type perspective. Like, I think he could be that type of edge. And it's going to give a lot of versatility, I think, down the road, especially because that's a kid where, like, you don't want to see Isaiah Foskey dropping in coverage a ton, right? But I'd be okay with seeing Josh Burnham dropping the coverage a ton. Like, you can do so many different things for him. And if you get longer and more athletic around him on the interior defensive line, then we can talk about slanting a ton to the weak side. We can talk about giving some different looks up front, blitzing from different spots. And I think Burnham gives you that type of production, right? Like, I think that he gives you that type of projection, I should say. So I'm excited about it because I think that he's a multifaceted edge. He's different. He's not just a pass rusher. And who knows what type of pass rusher he's going to be. I mean, he's long, he's explosive. So you feel like with a good defensive line coach, that can certainly be developed.
Right.
But at least I know is that he's going to be a very versatile edge, if nothing else.
Here's the other thing. I do believe that Marcus Freeman has always wanted, and Al Golden as an NFL coach will definitely want. You want to have the ability to play two Vipers at once, especially when you look at the way college football is going. There's going to be times when, like, let's just say next in 2023, Isaiah Foskey's off to the NFL. Let's say Keon Keeley starting as a true freshman, which I wouldn't dismiss as a possibility at all. Let's say Keon's playing and you've still got Riley Mills as your big end, right? Riley Mills is like 290. He's a defensive end. There's going to be teams on your schedule, USC, others, where you're going to want to, in your base defense, have Keon and a guy like Josh Burnham on the field together with Riley Mills and Tyson Ford inside. You're just going to want to do that. And you need to be able to do that. You need to be able on third down or when a team goes tempo, where if Oklahoma State is going to come out in a bowl game and say, we're just going to go tempo and spread the field, say, fine, we're cool. Hey, give me my speed package out there. It's Keon and Burnham on the outside. It's Ford and Riley on the, and it could sub Ford for, Onye. I mean, you get the point that I'm making, right? Where you want to get those kind of guys. And then you've got a guy where, and the reason that there's a benefit to that is if you have two Vipers like that, and we think Keon's going to end up being a bigger guy too, you can still go 3 down and not have to have Keon Keeley dropping into coverage. You can still rush him, and now you've got Burnham that you can move around and do some of the stuff you did with Isaiah Foskey last year, while allowing Keon Keeley to do what he does best, which is see that guy with the football, that single-digit number or the number under 20, go get him.
Well, you can even run some 3-3 looks, man, and have the Viper stacked, and you could just bring pressure from all different spots because that's the tough part against the 3-3 stack is that like those linebackers are hidden, right? So like you're just kind of like, where's the pressure coming from? Which way are they slanted? Because everybody is lined up in a head up alignment. So you're kind of just like, okay, offensive lineman communication so big in that instance. One guy could be slanted one way, a linebacker could be blitzing A or B gap. Like it's just so many different possibilities. So, I mean, I know Notre Dame is just in theory, at least under Coach Freeman, they want to be versatile, right? Like they want to show 3 down. They want to show 4 down. They want to come from different spots and move like that. I'm excited for the future just to see how they use him. Cause again, like stacked on the line of scrimmage, blitzing A, B as a traditional edge rusher. Like, I just think there's a lot of things that you could do with the Joshua Burnham. So I'm excited about the move. I think I like, and we've talked about how they continue to recruit linebacker, right? How can you get them all in the field? That's one way to get them on the field.
And the thing is, this potentially opens up a spot for another linebacker in this class. Because when you think, we're like, okay, when you signed 4 linebackers last year, you're trying to sign 4 more this year. Because for a while there, Ryan, it's starting to make sense. Like things are starting to make sense now, right? For a while there, we were hearing it's only 3 linebackers. You can only go 3. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, we think we can take Mpemba and Osbury. And then you start thinking, well, maybe because they maybe view Mpemba as an end down the road. Well, now it makes sense. Mpemba may still be an edge player. But now you've got a Burnham and an Impemba in back-to-back years, guys that can be ends. And I would say the thing about Impemba is he's already bigger than Josh Burnham was at the same age. He may be able to be the big end. I mean, who knows if you're able to get him? But it started to make a lot more sense now that they kind of saw this one coming. Just because, and from what I'm told, this was not a move because he wasn't like he was like all the freshman linebackers are struggling to, except for Junior Tuihalamaka, are struggling to pick up the defense because Al Golden's throwing a lot at him. There was what I was told. There is no question that Josh Burnham athletically can play this position. It's just we think he can help us now here because he doesn't have to know the whole defense as a Viper. He can just line up and say, here's your basic responsibilities. There's just a little. I mean, it doesn't mean you can just put anybody out there and say go rush the quarterback. It's not that. We'll say that hyperbolically, but it's never that simple in college football. Not against anybody good. Mm-hmm. It's just that now it'd be, it's more simplified. He doesn't have to move around as much. He, line up here, which a Will or a Mike does. They were playing him at Mike as well, which is, I mean, that's a lot of responsibility for a guy. Junior's picked it up really well because Junior's wicked smart and he's been playing Mike his whole life. Sure. And he's had a really, really good spring. That was also in the update that we put up on Saturday. So it was not from a negative position is the point that I'm trying to make. He was struggling here, so let's move him. It wasn't that.
Yeah, and I think that one thing is worth mentioning is that Joshua Burnham also played quarterback in high school, right? So he was a projection on the defensive side of the football. I know he played defense as well, but he's a guy that has never just played one position. So it's always going to be about maturation with him. And I think I would say it's a little bit of a shout out, Brian. I don't know if you would agree with this, but the fact that Junior Tuihalamaka came in and has shown the way he does, I think that's why you're more comfortable with moving Burnham because he's just come in and he's picked it up so quick.
If Junior was struggling, I don't know if you could feel that way. I mean, one of the things we had in our intel piece, and again, another reason I need to be on the board, is we put this up Saturday. Is that there's a possibility that Junior ends up beating people out at Mike this year to be the number 2 Mike. I mean, that's a legitimate possibility the way he's played this spring, and you saw him in person. And I believe one of the comments you made to me when we went out to dinner, no, it wasn't dinner because that was the pro day. After we talked after the practice was, I think it was you, maybe it was Sean. It was like, Junior moves a lot better than I thought he was going to move.
Yeah.
Seeing him in person. But he's still big. That's the thing. It's not like he lost 25 pounds. He's still big.
No, he's 240. He's a big kid.
He moves. But it's the mental part that has allowed Junior to really transit because Jalen Sneed's a freaky athlete, but he's not playing like a freaky athlete yet because he's still trying to figure out the defense. Junior's been able to pick it up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
This is I love questions like this, and I generally mean that. What should the expectations of the blue gold game be? If it doesn't tell us much about the team, when will we see in the fall? What does it tell us? Here's something. Number one, the biggest expectation is nobody get hurt, right? Like that's really my only takeaway I care about is nobody get hurt. I do think there's things you can take away from it. My pushback against expectation of blue gold game is we should not be making big sweeping conclusions based on who plays well or doesn't play well. Like, and it's what I said after the 2015 spring, like the spring of 2015 going into the 2015 season. Deshaun Kaiser looked terrible in the spring game. I didn't care. We had seen him do some really good things in practices. Like I didn't care that he got outplayed by Montgomery Van Gorder because it's a spring game and we saw what he could do in practice. We know his talent level. Well, he goes out that next year, is thrust into the rotation. And I mean, he even thought he was going to stop playing football. He talked about not playing football. He was ready to go play baseball after that spring game. Just, I don't want to see anybody play that poorly, but it doesn't really matter a ton. I think the big thing for me is I want to, because see, they're doing this draft thing. So I don't know like how the draft is going to go. Like, are you drafting the line or are you drafting individual linemen? So there's so much we don't know. But if the offensive line is playing together in the blue gold game, I want to see how they're playing. I want to see, are they driving their feet through contact? And, but just it's understanding that you're just 15 practices into what's over a 45, over a 35 practice format, which when you consider getting ready for a game, it's minimum 35 practices. You're going to have 15 in the spring, minimum 20. It's closer to like 25 in the fall. You're getting close to 40 practices. You're about a third of the way there right now. And that's the thing, Ryan, is just understanding where they are in the process of building the team. If you understand that correctly, then we can have a great talk about the blue gold. What'd you see? What'd you like? What you didn't like? What bothers me is when people make Tyler Buckner should be the starting quarterback because of how good he looked against the third-team defense in the Blue Gold game. There's a legitimate conversation we had last year. Let's not do that, right? If Drew Pine or if Steve Angeli has the best Blue Gold game, can we not have that conversation? If Drew Pine outplays someone, or if Tyler Buckner outplays Drew Pine in the Blue Gold game, that doesn't tell me a thing about who the starting quarterback is going to be next year, because the 14 practices leading up to it were far more important to me than a fun scrimmage. So I want to see guys moving around, and I want to see guys we haven't seen a whole lot. That's the best part for me for the Blue Gold game is I want to see Aiden Gobira. I want to see Tyson Ford. I want to see Justin Walters. I want to see Philip Riley and Ryan Barnes, guys we haven't seen a chance to play. I don't give a rip what Michael Mayer. I would not play Michael Mayer in the Blue Gold game. I wouldn't play him. I wouldn't play Foskey. I mean, there's several guys I just flat out am not playing in the Blue Gold game. I wouldn't play Blake Fisher just because of the knee injury he had. I mean, he's got 14. You know, if I may be playing for a quarter, that's just me. I wouldn't play Chris Tyree in the Blue Gold game because of the concussion thing. It just doesn't matter a lot to me. Doesn't mean I don't enjoy it. Doesn't mean it's not a chance to see it. So as long as you have the right perspective on it, then there's a lot of things we can learn about it. Like, hey, this guy's in good shape. This guy ran around. This kid's, playing with some confidence. Remember how good Litchfield Adjavon looked in last year's spring game? Spring game success doesn't equal you're going to be good in the fall. It doesn't. That's my takeaway, Ryan.
Yeah, I just want to see competitiveness, and I want to see speed. I want to see fast mistakes. Like, that's one thing, especially in a spring that, ultimately it matters, but it doesn't actually matter, right? Like, you're going to get to the fall, the games, you're going to be like, no one's going to care about what you did in spring anymore. Like, that doesn't matter. But I want to see, you have a new coaching staff. There's a lot of positivity and there's a lot of optimism around the program, and we've seen it in person already, the energy that the practices have been run with. I want to see, especially with the draft concept, nothing is going to be where, in theory, where people are completely comfortable playing next to one another. I want to see obviously the technique that they've been learning during the spring, but more than anything, I want to see fast, aggressive mistakes, because there's going to be a lot of mistakes. You're going to be in the wrong gap filling. You're going to run the wrong routes. You're going to, take a bad angle to a play. But I want to see aggressiveness. I want to be fast, aggressive mistakes. Like, I want to see that fire kind of get lit a little bit and just kind of pop off the screen a little bit. If they leave the game, there's no injuries, and they competed all game, and they showed just some flashes of ability, then I'm happy. Like, I don't like to overanalyze spring games too much. It's just not my thing.
Agree completely. There's a lot of conversation about this, so we'll just go ahead and answer it now. Charlie Moore, what do you think about Ed O being on campus today? Okay. There's been a lot more made of this, I think, than should be. That's my opinion.
It was hopping on Twitter for a little bit, man.
Yeah,
it was hopping.
That's one of the wonderful many things about Twitter. Look, here's something y'all have to understand. A couple things here. Number one, coaches who get fired do this. Coaches who are unemployed do this all the time. Coaches who are employed do this whenever they can. It just usually can't do it during the spring because, teams are gone. But look, I remember seeing Todd Graham at a practice one time with his kid. It's what they do. I don't put a lot in it. It doesn't mean a whole lot to me. Ed Orgeron interviewed Marcus Freeman for the defensive coordinator job a year ago, and Marcus Freeman had to think about, he was close to taking the job per Marcus Freeman's words. There's clearly a relationship there, and this is just what they do. And look, let's not kid ourselves that you can't get something from Ed Orgeron. Like, would I hire Ed Orgeron? Probably not. There's certain things about Ed Orgeron's personality and character that I don't particularly care for much. That's just my stance. But if I'm also a D-line coach, do I want to hear what Ed Orgeron has to say about coaching the defensive line? Yes, I do, because he's very good at that. But this is also about Ed Orgeron wanting to be around Notre Dame to see what they're doing. Because, Urban Meyer did that a ton in his little layoff between Florida and Ohio State. He went all over the place. Bob Stoops has done this. Coaches that are between jobs, so to speak, do this all the time. And it makes sense to do it. Because the reality is Ed Orgeron's not going to get hired as a head coach again in a year, most likely. It's going to be as a D-line coach or something like that. And so you want to get out, you want to see people. I still want to coach, and it's just part of the process, and that's about all it was to me. So it's not like Ed Orgeron's going to show up tomorrow and be Notre Dame's defensive analyst. That's not why. Now, does that mean it won't happen? I'm not saying that, but I don't think that's why he's here, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, it's cool to see Edo, though. You know, I think it's neat to see those types of guys show up to practice. Like, no negative to it.
So Vince was at practice today, and he was recording stuff, and he looks over there, and it's Edo talking to somebody, and Vince goes, "Go Tigers!" It was actually really. I'll have to show you the video. It was really fun.
That's awesome.
And then Charlie Moore also said some pocket change to say thanks. Appreciate that, Charlie, very, very much. Let's get back to some more questions here, Ryan. Got to the expectations. Kenny Moore, Braden Lindsey has got to be way more consistent this year as well. He will be critical. Really like what I am hearing about him so far. I agree. He has to. He has to. And again, I don't think Braden Lindsey has to be a 60 catch guy. I don't. If Braden Lindsey's given me 3 to 4 touches a game, as long as they're the right kind of touches, he can have a big impact. I want to see him doing more stuff that gets him the ball in space than what we saw last year. He was just catching hitches and quick outcuts on RPOs. Like he needs to do more stuff like we saw against Stanford. Motion him down, have him run a quick skinny post for a touchdown. Like that's the kind of get him on some jets and some. I want to see him run drive. If he doesn't run 10 drive routes a game, I'm going to be a little frustrated, right? I mean, I'm being a little hyperbolic with the number, but you get the point I'm making, right? Like get linebackers chasing him in zone or get corners having to chase him across the field in man. Either one is a win for Notre Dame because that then sets up so much stuff. If he hits a couple of those crossing routes and then turns up the edge, guess what happens the next time that the linebackers see him running that drive route? They're going to come down on him, and then guess what happened? Michael Mayer's running an in-cut behind him at 15 yards, right? Like that's the whole point, and I want to see more of that from him, but schematically that's on the coaches, but Braden's got to go out and continue to be a guy that can be dependent on. You can depend on him. He's going to be out there every day. He's going to show up at practice every day. He's going to catch the ball. He's going to do all those kind of things. That's what that's what he's got to take his game to. Because you got to be able to trust. I mean, for all the skill in the world, got to be able to trust a guy. As a quarterback, as a coach, you got to be able to trust a guy, Ryan.
Yeah, no, I mean, Braden Lindsey brings something to the team that they need, right? Like you need that speed. You don't need it in a high volume like you're talking about here, but just seeing him in one live practice, I will say from a technical perspective, he looks like a different player right now. From a competitive perspective, he just looks like a different player. He was competing, and although the one big highlight was against Jaden Mickey on a little bit of a stutter go, I mean, still, like the just attention to detail and the subtleness in the route, like everything was just looked a lot cleaner and a lot more. I don't know,
like a wide receiver, not just an athlete trying to play wide receiver.
Yeah, and it looked like everything just had a purpose to it, right? Like there's just sometimes where wide receivers are running routes that just don't look very confident, where you're just like, I don't think he really trusts what he's doing out there. But Braden Lindsey just looked very confident in his own skin during that practice. So it's only one practice out of the whatever number that we're on now, but I think that you need Braden Lindsey in some type of role this year to be successful. And it's very positive to see that he is clearly taken to the coaching so far, and he's completely playing at a higher competitive level than I've ever seen him play. Now, that being said, I need to see it, man, because I've been calling for a Braden Lindsey breakout for years now.
Well, especially after 2019 when you started to see it. Like, okay. Yep. I can't wait till next year. And then he's hurt. And then it just hasn't been that case. So yes, it would be really nice to see because it helps everyone else. It takes the pressure off of everybody else. You want to have your safeties driving down hard on Michael Mayer every time he runs an option or an outcut. Fine. I'm running a post route behind it. Good luck. Yeah. It's just what you do. You know what I mean? It gives you options. Okay. You want to drive your safety over top to kick. Okay, fine. I'm going to be banging back. When you're going backside to my W or whatever. I mean, it's just, it makes it a lot more fun. When you have options, okay, they do this, we can do this. They do this, we can do this. It just makes you a better football team. In the video clips, Ethan O'Connor says it looks like Tyler Buckner had a quicker release, but seems to get a little less velocity behind his passes. First, do you agree? And is that a concern for you? First, I do not agree. Number one, some of those throws were during warmups. You're not driving the ball the way you would in warmups. It's more about the footwork in the pocket is the focus, the footwork and the timing of it. Number one. Number two, I didn't see less velocity. I actually liked the zip I was seeing on most of those throws from the practice highlights. So it can't be a concern because I didn't see that. Now, I don't think Tyler Buckner has a bazooka arm either. Like I've never thought that. He's got a good arm, but he doesn't have a bazooka arm. I think he gets good velocity, 15 and under. That's never been something that I was concerned about for me, Ryan. And I just, he's the only question I have about him throwing the football. from a physical standpoint is I still just don't know how far he can throw it because he got the ball out so quickly in high school and showed such great anticipation. The ball never went more than 45, 50 yards. The same thing with the throw against Virginia Tech. I mean, it was a deep shot. Kevin Austin caught it at 42 yards. That's not really – and those throws he can make, I'm more referring to can he run the play action post route? Can he hit Braden Lindsay on the post throw like we saw Ian Book hit it in 2019? That's the only throw I don't know that Tyler Buchner can make because I just have never seen him do it.
Yeah, no, and it's fair. I mean, we saw him in person, and I will say the zip is there, like no problem. And I will say that he's a very confident thrower too, which I think to the release quickness might have something to do there, Ethan, to your question a little bit, but I don't think there's a real big change in his delivery or his release at all. I just think that he's throwing with more conviction and everything's just kind of tight and very consistent right now. So, and I never want to, because I watched the video obviously, but I never want to overanalyze, especially practice routes where he's just taking a simple 3-step drop and just getting the ball out quickly against air. Like that's not going to tell me a ton. I want to see it when obviously the live bullets start, but I mean, I have seen nothing from Tyler Buchner so far this spring that has me worried. I am excited for what I just put on Twitter yesterday. I am very excited to see what Tyler Buchner does this year. I am.
M. Kostrup says, is there any way for these guys to practice creative decision-making, broken plays outside of full scrimmages or 7-on-7s? Yes. First of all, 7-on-7s are the worst time to work on that. I hate them. And scrimmages are a good time, but yes, you'll do drills. You'll have periods where you work on this. Because the receivers need to be taught what happens when the quarterback takes off running. The quarterback has to have an idea of what are the receivers doing when things break down. Now, a basic rule, and everybody kind of does it a little bit different. But it's a basic rule is if the quarterback takes off to his right and your backside, you just come level across, right? If you're short, you break deep. If you're deep, you come short. And that actually is kind of what happened on the great interception that Kyle Hamilton had last year against Florida State. It was a broken play. The quarterback's running. Justin Adamiola and I think it was Clarence Lewis had kind of covered a receiver, but when the quarterback took off, he spun out and went deep. And the defenders kind of were going to the quarterback, and he came free. If Kyle Hamilton doesn't see that and come across, that's a touchdown. And so you practice that. You don't just wait for scrimmages and you'll practice in scrimmages, but it really comes down to you rep those. You got to know what you're responsible. There's method to that madness, right? And you've got to work on as a receiver because it can be real easy for a player like Buchner. Like when Jack Cohn's moving around, the receivers are like, I got to get open. I got to get open. I got to get open. When Tyler starts running around, your thought is, I got to block. I got to block. I got to block. I got to block. And you need to work on making sure that, hey, you don't give up on Tyler Buchner till Tyler Buchner gives up on you. And I'm not talking about like you understand what I'm saying, like on the play. He has clearly tucked it and he's past the line, right? It's almost like if you're up close, don't worry about blocking somebody. Tyler's going to have to take care of that guy. You keep working open because if that guy comes up, Tyler can then flick it over his head, which we saw him do to Chris Tyree last year. So you've got to really work. It's harder, Ryan, in my opinion, for receivers with a guy like Tyler Buchner than it is for a guy like Jack Cohn or Drew Pine when it comes to the breaking down because there's such the threat of the other guy running, in my opinion. I'm not sure if you agree with that or not, but I definitely think that as a receivers coach.
Well, you always see occasionally when an athletic quarterback gets outside the pocket, he ends up throwing it away. You'll see like a wide receiver get called for like, illegal contact downfield because they already started blocking, right? So it's like an illegal block downfield type of situation. So it is difficult at times because there definitely is that balance between he's going to take off, he's extending as a passer. I mean, it definitely is, but I agree with you. They need to make themselves available. Once he breaks the line of scrimmage, then we can get involved in the run game because an early block for Tyler Buchner, again, it could be a big help, obviously, but the kid is just such an explosive and physical runner. Like, he's going to make the first guy miss more often than not anyway. So, but that stuff is, especially in team situations and full scrimmage situations, that's where you're really working on that when there's kind of live bullets, right? Like, and you can work on that even just out of like kind of individual drills, but obviously seeing a rush and seeing players actually coming at you, because it's a lot different.
Because an individual, you'll work on the responsibilities. But during those drills, that what he's doing. It's like with anything. It's like when you're working on a hitch drill, you know this is what's going on. But then when you see live bullets, well, what happens if the defense covers it? You know, I mean, so yes, it always has to be then taken into the team stuff. And that's the big key to the whole thing. So really good stuff, Ryan. Josh Miller says, I counted 6 players on offense for All-American, either first, second, or third team, if everything goes well, and I count 5 on defense. What do you guys think? Now, number one, I don't see any scenario in which Notre Dame has 11 All-American next year. And I don't take the question I mean that way. I kind of look at it as guys that could be All-Americans next year. Trying to think about that, Ryan. I think that we could 6 on offense. I have a hard time getting to. You got Mayer, right? And you've got 2 offensive linemen for sure. That'll be in that. I mean, maybe 3. If Notre Dame's offensive line is what we think it's going to be, having 3 All-Americans is not unheard of. We've seen it in the past. I don't know if I see any of the receivers in any of them putting up the production needed to be an All-American. And I don't see it at running back, and I don't see it at quarterback. When you look at the quarterbacks coming back, I mean, with quarterback, first, second, or third team, it's only 3 dudes. You know, as even if Tyler Buckner plays as well as he can this year, is he going to put up the numbers that is beyond Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, guys like that? I have a harder time seeing that. Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams is going to put up stupid numbers this year because the offense he plays in. I mean, whether he's a great player or not, it's going to have great numbers. So it'll be harder. I have a hard time getting past 4 on offense. Ryan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Mayer's obviously the easy one. I think both tackles should be in the conversation, which is a tough sell even for Blake Fisher, to be honest, just because he's only played a couple football games. So, like, even if someone's like wants to push back and say like you can't mention Blake Fisher, I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
Jared Patterson is obviously the easy one on the offensive line. I mean, if he's not the best center coming back to college football, he's top 2 or 3. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a pretty easy conversation there. So I would only be okay with Mayer and him absolutely on the offensive side of the football. I'd be okay if you include both tackles. So I agree. I think 4 is probably the number. I love Lorenzo Styles, but I just don't think that he's going to be the volume getter, like you said, in this passing attack to be that guy this year. Like, we'll see, obviously, maybe junior year might take a big jump, but I would say 4 offensively. Defensively, I mean, all right, Foskey obviously is an easy one. I think Jason Adamolola with a step can be in that conversation for sure.
Yep. That's not a stretch at all for me. Yeah.
No. Cam Hart could be in that conversation for me.
Mm-hmm.
Brandon Joseph could be in that conversation for me. No, you're shaking your
No,
head.
I'm shaking my head, yes, but I cannot believe it's taking you this long to get to your boy.
Well, I mean, he's just the assumed player, you know, Brian. he's the safe bet.
Good comeback. Maris being obviously the player that we're talking about. There.
Yes. Maris Loifau would be the last one because, I mean, if Maris Loifau has the type of season I think he can have, then, I mean, sure. I think he could be 100+ tackle, 10+ tackle for loss type of dude. Like, I do think he could be that player.
Well, I mean, and this is going to sound like a shot, and it's not at all, because I really like what JD did last year. But if JD can put up the numbers he put up last year playing on the same side of the field as Isaiah Foskey, then there's no reason to think that Maris can't put up even better numbers, especially since he brings the sort of the pass rushing ability to the table. I mean, JD last year had 101 tackles and 7 tackles for loss, and I think he's a better Mike. And so you look at this defense, Maris is going to be dropping into coverage. He's going to be blitzing. He's going to have those game-changing kind of plays that JD just wasn't going to have. JD wasn't going to drop underneath the seam route and pick it off. You know, he just doesn't have the length. He may cover the guy well and you don't throw the ball, but it's just not kind of how it's going to be. So yeah, I could see that. I don't think we'll get to 5, but I could see 5 guys being on there. No question about it. I could definitely see that. And, and then of course there's always a potential for a breakout somewhere. Maybe a running back does have a monster year. Maybe, because look, here's things like Josh Adams in 2017 had over 1,400 rushing yards. He wasn't an All-American. It wasn't the first, second, or third. When you get to those positions where it's only like one dude, it's a little tougher. It's a little tougher to have that because a lot of this, Ryan, is about numbers and reputation. And that's the thing that's going to hurt Notre Dame is who's the running back that comes into the season with the reputation that All-American voters are looking for, which is kind of stupid that as we have more and more television opportunities that these All-American lists still are so bad. So many times. It's like, wait, who made All-American? Like, seriously? That guy and another guy didn't? Like Michael Mayer. How Michael Mayer did not make an All-American squad last year and didn't make a Mackey finalist is just absurd. It's
Mhm.
just absolutely absurd. And, I don't know.
Some of those awards are weird, man. Some of those
Yeah,
awards are
it
weird.
felt
I
like
was
a
even
virtue
looking.
signaling, like the whole thing for the tight end especially it felt just like virtue. Let's throw a little bone to the group of 5 schools. Like could you imagine what kind of numbers Michael Mayer would have put up last year if he was playing against the same schedule that Isaiah Likely and Trey McBride? They're good players. Don't get me wrong. They're not Michael Mayer, and they weren't
No.
last year either.
No.
So no.
Well, Brian, here's a good one. This was most weird award last year, in my opinion. Who do you know who the Jim Thorpe Award winner was given to the best defensive back in college football?
Yeah, it's Kobe Bryant.
Kobe. He wasn't even the best
He was
corner
the
on
best
his own
DB at
team.
Cincinnati.
Right.
It was
Right.
so weird.
I know.
Yeah, as soon as you said Jim Thorpe, I was like, "Oh yeah, I know he's going with this one." It made. And look, Kobe Bryant's a nice player, but Ahmad
Solid
Gardner was
player.
the best corner
Yeah.
in college football last year.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. Okay. Yeah. I guess in theory, Kobe Bryant had more plays on the football because you know why that happens.
Right.
It's very easy.
Right.
You're not going to throw it to Ahmad Gardner. You're going to throw Kobe
Right,
Bryant.
and that goes back to my whole point of it's a stats-driven honor, and now a reputation and/or stats-driven, and some of these are just absurd. I mean, the whole like Ed Oliver winning the award over Quentin Nelson. It's just like some of the stuff is just like I mean. Just stupid. That's why, like, honestly, Ryan, I can't tell you the last time I watched the Heisman ceremony. It just matters so little to me. Now, if a Notre Dame guy's up for it, I'll talk about it, and it'll be a big story because it still has some. I mean, it carries weight. If you have a Heisman Trophy winner, that carries weight with kids, especially in this era of NIL. But I don't care. That's the thing for me. I don't care about it, and just a lot of these awards are that way. It really is. Like who won the Doak this year?
Doak Walker Kenneth Walker probably, right?
I'm trying to look at it because I remember there was some weird stuff there too. Like there was a guy that so the finalists were. Let me find here real quick. I'm going to find who the finalists were. Kenneth Walker won it, but I remember the 3 finalists were like, wait a minute, what? Like it was Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall, and Tyler Beatty. Maybe it was last year. I'm trying to remember it. There was the Doak Walker, I thought this year was one of the ones, but that's not it because those 3 guys make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's the year before. I have to look at it. But there was one of these years recently where I was like, wait a minute, the best running back in college football is not a finalist for the Doak Walker Award? Like, what the heck is going on here? So, yeah, some of these are just really, really strange, man. It just really makes no sense how these go. But yeah, Kenneth Walker was a shocker last year because he was good at Wake Forest, but it wasn't like I didn't see that coming.
Dude, it was weird on our podcast. One of the co-hosts, Alex, that was actually his sleeper last summer, dude. He called that one. He's like, "Yeah, I really like this kid transferring to Michigan State. I like this film a lot at Wake Forest." Then he blew up. I'm like, "Good on you, Alex. That was a good call, man. That was a really good call." Can I do a quick shout out to Ladarius Martin, who's in the chat, Brian?
Yes, is he back?
Yes, he is.
He's
in the chat right now.
My man. So he's there. There he is. We were just talking about you the other day, man. So we were wondering how you were doing. So glad to see you. Glad to see you to back with us today, buddy. So let's get back to some more of these questions here. Ryan, Domer Gris says, how do the main 2023 receiver recruits compare to Xavier Bradshaw? You said as long as Notre Dame passed on Xavier Bradshaw individually and not just all receivers like him, you'd understand. Do any current recruits have his skill? Yes, Rodney Gallagher absolutely does have his skill set. Mm-hmm. No question. And again, a lot of stuff you say about last year's receiving thing, you have to that stuff's in the past because it's a different coach. So, but yeah, I mean, with Rodney Gallagher, and then there's some 2024 kids they're going after, Ryan, like Tassir Denmark, and there's several guys like him that are like the smaller, shiftier, speedier. Emmett Mosley is in that same category to me.
Ryan Pelham.
Yes. And there's another, like, what's the real fast kid from Florida?
Zion Reagans.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Like he is. So there's a lot of small, shiftier receivers that you're seeing them go after. And they're still going after the bigger guys too. They're doing what Chancey Stuckey said, which is I want a point guard, a 2-guard, a couple 4s. He's going after the different type of players, which is a good thing. Absolutely. But yes, as much as I love Xavier Bradshaw, and I still think Notre Dame should have taken him, Rodney Gallagher is an even more dynamic athlete. Now, Rodney Gallagher is not the receiver that Xavier Bradshaw was yet. No, not even close, because he doesn't play it. But just from he's bigger than Xavier was, a little thicker, and he's a little bit more explosive. But I still would have taken Xavier Bradshaw in a heartbeat. That was one of the biggest mistakes the previous staff made, in my opinion. Rob Diddall says Brian and Vince. We'll change that to Brian and Ryan. By what game on the schedule do you feel you will have a pretty good gauge on how efficient the offense is? It's a good question. Because if they come out and shred Ohio State, that doesn't tell us that the offense is definitely going to be elite for the rest of the year.
Sure.
It just means Ohio State's got its own issue. It could just mean Ohio State has its own issues, Ryan. So you got Ohio State, then Marshall, then Cal, then North Carolina bye week, and then I forget who the 5th team on the schedule is after the bye week. Let me go ahead and look that up real quick. But I think it's like Stanford or BYU. No, it's bye week, North Carolina bye week, then BYU, and then I think they come home and play Stanford. So for me, Ryan, it would be the BYU game. You're 5 games in. It's your probably the best defense you will have faced up to that point in time of the year, in my opinion. Would you agree with that? Like up to that point, I think their defense is going to be better than Cal plays good defense under Justin Wolf. Very underrated defense, just not talented. That's the problem with Cal. They just lack talent, but they're really well coached. North Carolina will be better on defense, but still not good. Marshall just doesn't have the athletes, and Ohio State's defense shouldn't be that good. I think BYU up to that point in time. So I'd say BYU game is when we'll really get a sense of, okay, this offense is or is not a really good offense. That's my take, because I want to see it done against a couple really good teams, and I really feel like that's the time when because the thing about that game, right, that's week 6, because Notre Dame has a bye. And the reason I say that is you want to really start to see how you are when teams have some film on you. It's like, let's not forget what the Notre Dame defense looked like the first 4 or 5 games of Brian Van Gorder's tenure before people had some film on them. They looked okay, had a shutout against Michigan. But that's why I say week 6 will really tell us, like, okay, this offense is really good, or, okay, they haven't gotten it going yet. I'm concerned. One or the other. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fair. It's fair. I honestly, my first impulse was the 3rd or 4th game. So I was actually thinking by the bye week, because although I agree, especially with those first few games, you're not playing any juggernaut defenses, and BYU is a pretty good defense. I mean, at least they were last year. So you would assume that would be one of the testing points of the season. But I think you could start to see it even before they play a team like a BYU if it's heading in the right direction. So I would say you can start to see the glimpses a little bit early and start to feel better about gauging how much of a difference they've made. Because, I mean, Notre Dame didn't look great offensively against a couple inferior opponents last year. I mean, from an offensive line perspective.
Purdue. Yeah.
So I think that you can start to see it a little bit earlier, but I agree that I think that BYU is kind of a benchmark to putting it to the absolute test.
I'll say this, Ryan. I think that you could know by game 2 or 3 if an offense is going to struggle. I think where I'm coming from is, I guess I'm looking at this from an optimistic point of view. I need to see more of the good before I feel good about it being a really efficient, explosive offense. So I think if I'm looking at it from your point of view, I agree with you, because we started to see the chinks in the armor against Toledo. I mean, and then Purdue was like, okay, there's a problem here. And but if they're not playing well through the North Carolina game, then yes, that's concerning. That's a really big. I don't need to get to BYU to be concerned about that. For me, it's more about if you're going well, I need more, because of just the quality of the opposition. And again, I go back to, I just want to see how you do when teams have more film on you. That's going to be the big gauge for me. How do you do when you have more film? But I'll say this, if Notre Dame gets through that BYU game playing well, you could really start to see the offense take off, because the next 3 games, Ryan, after the BYU game are Stanford at home, UNLV at home, and at Syracuse. So they could go into that Clemson game on November 5th really rolling, because those are some defenses you should be able to get healthy against. I mean, whether you're continuing to build on success or you've been okay, but you need to take off, those are defenses that I think you can get right on. Just like we saw this year. Like if they would have been able to, play some bad teams early and have success, because what people kind of missed about this Purdue team last year is Purdue was a pretty good defense last year, up until the Tennessee game. Ohio State had some success on them, but they were a good, solid defense last year. But that doesn't mean Notre Dame should have had the issues that they had against them. I mean, so you could see the chinks in the armor. But if they could have maybe, had some early success and maybe played Georgia Tech and Stanford early, and maybe they didn't play as poorly, I think that could have helped with the confidence. But I think it's a really good question, Rob. Really good question. Keith Wiegand says, other than Mayer, who is going to be the chain mover? Avery Davis.
Yeah.
I mean, Avery Davis has been a money third down player since he got into the receiving corps. I mean, he's been really good on third down.
Mm-hmm. I think Lorenzo Styles could do a little bit of that stuff too, because I think he's got that short to intermediate, just quick separator type of mold that he can move the chain too. But I agree, Avery Davis was the first name that popped ahead because he's that slot that just kind of understands how to hit zones,
the quarterback,
sit down, and
the quarterback in him. He's doing what he wants a receiver to do. It's like you're saying, hey, I can't run the route for you. Well, Avery Davis can. You know what I mean? As a quarterback, you say that I can't run the route for you. Avery's like, okay, I can now. So,
and I'm assuming, Keith, this is a question for receiving, obviously Paralis, but I mean, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a tough situation, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, if we don't see Tyler Buckner in some type of quarterback power situation, be that chain mover for running perspective. I think all the running backs can do it, but there's something about a 215-pound tough quarterback with dual threat ability that he could be a chain mover with his legs on 3rd and short.
Yep. David Solomon says, I'm hearing Ahrensberger has passed Nana on the depth chart, but do either one challenge for playing time? Well, they both played last year, so I would expect them to both play this year. I think it's a question is how much and in what order. Ryan, we've talked about things you said to me when you were at the practice in the middle, earlier in the month. And I remember one of the first things you said to me was about Alexander Ahrensberger looks the part. I mean, he is an impressive looking athlete.
He's one of those guys that you just see if you're coming in to just scout the team for a second, you write down his number off the side because you're like, that kid is a 6'6" plus kid with 34 plus inch arms. He looks the part, and he is filled out since he first came to Notre Dame. And I mean, David, to be honest, they're going to have to play, right? Riley Mills is not going to play 100% of the snaps at big end. Somebody's going to have to take the chance. And Ahrensberger has a lot of traits to really like, man. There's developmental upside with him. So I'm not overly surprised that he may have passed Nana in theory on the depth chart, but honestly, it's going to be a day-to-day basis. We're still in spring, so these guys are going to be kind of battling back and forth. But I'm excited if Ahrensberger can take a step forward because, I mean, he has the length and the explosiveness where I think that he can play a role if he's consistent. If
he can be consistent, it's not going to be competitive. That between those two, Nana is just really limited athletically, which is surprised. We started to see it his senior year. He got a little tight in the hips his senior year of high school, and he's kind of gotten increasingly more stiff as he's kind of gotten older. And he's a strong kid, and he can be a good run defender. That's what he did a good job last year. Right, he's a good edge setter and space eater and all that. So there's value to a guy like Nana, but Alexander brings you a little bit more every down potential. I mean, he's the kind of guy I wouldn't be upset if the inside of a 4-down, 3rd-down pass defense is him and Jason Adamiola, because you're just getting that length, and then Riley Mills can be part of that too or whatever. Maybe put Jason on the edge and have Riley and Alexander inside. I mean, there's a lot of options you can have to do that, and you may have Justin in there. I mean, because you can have different types of bodies to throw at teams depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And it's like if I'm, I guess where my head was, it should clarify was if I'm playing a team that's like an air raid that's getting the ball out quickly is kind of where I'm looking at 3rd down, because you get those 6'5", 6'7" guys right up the middle getting their hands up. If the ball comes out quickly, he's a pretty good athlete. I mean, that's the thing is, he just is not a football player yet, to that level. But if the light goes on for Alexander Ahrensberger, Notre Dame might have the biggest big end combination in the country. I mean, Riley Mills is 6'5", 290, and Alexander Ahrensberger is 6'7". And he's every bit of, 255, 260, would you say, Ryan? I mean, those are some big boys. I mean, Riley with the girth and the length, and then Alexander with the length. It's just about whether or not the light goes on. And, because, again, this is a kid that played high school football in Germany and all that other kind of stuff. But I'd be a little surprised if he's not playing more than Nana. That's not a good sign for Alexander, because physically, Ryan, it's not close. It's not. I mean, it's not close. But Nana brings a very specific value that you'll like on the D-line. Nana will compete. That's the one thing you can say about Nana. When he gets out there, he's going to play hard and he's going to battle. He's just limited athletically. But there's value for that. I mean, there's always value for that. There's no question about it. Let's get to the next question here. 99 Props BK1, Dr. Driscoll for my sanity. Dante Moore was just mentioned in the show for erasing the gap. Why can't I get rid of this nervous feeling that Dante isn't sure about Notre Dame, and that's why he is taking official visits? I think that's fair. I mean, look, I want people to be more positive, but I also am not a BSer, and I'm not going to lie to you, and this isn't a Homer show. I mean, look, the longer this goes on, the more understandable the angst about what's going on with Dante is. And we have knowledge about certain things that may have made us feel less nervous about it. But Ryan, you and I had this conversation last night. If he's not willing to make a decision here and go public with it, yeah, I mean, you can say all the great things that you want. You can tell recruits whatever it is you want, but if you're not willing to go public with it, if he hasn't done that by the end of April, and I'm less and less and less optimistic that's going to happen, yeah, it's fair to start saying, okay, maybe there is something about Notre Dame that he's just not, either he or his dad is just not sold on. I think that's a bad thing, because it's not, because it was so clear that Notre Dame was his leader, not just from what reporters write, but what Dante has been saying to people, that if he's not willing to do it, it's going to then start causing doubt in the minds of other recruits too. Because they're like, well, why Dante's been there so many times? What's wrong with Notre Dame? And it could be very damaging to this class.
Well, your over under scenario, right, is based upon, like, let's just be honest about it. Them hitting the over on how many commits are going to be in April is dependent on if Dante Moore decides to go to Notre Dame. Like, that is very dependent on why that would happen, right? I mean, like, we're not going to BS you guys. So I would say this, and I'll continue to say this: Notre Dame is the clear leader for Dante Moore, in my opinion, right now. But like Brian said, it's gotta happen at some point, right? And if you're the assumed leader for any player here, this is any recruit. If you are the assumed leader and you know you want to go there and everything points in that direction and you have the opportunity to commit and you just kind of let it drag on, there's something there, right? And there's something to talk about, and there's something to feel a little pessimistic about. It is. I still feel good that Dante Moore will end up in the class for Notre Dame when he decides to commit, but that is dependent on when it happens. Like, let's not lie about it.
But if we get to May 1st and he's talking about he's already set up official visits, I'm not going to feel great.
Yeah,
I'm not going to feel great. So it's because, like I said, people say, who's the number two? There isn't one. There isn't a number two. The concern, however, is that if he drags the process on, then that's when a number two emerges and becomes the new shiny toy. Because, like, at this point, what else can Notre Dame say to him? Like, what else can we show you? I mean, what else can we there's nothing else that they can say or do to him, and that's going to sell the program anymore. So, maybe it's just there's a whole lot of what could be's, and some of them are okay and some of them are a little bit not good. But we just don't know. We don't know the answer. We don't know why he's waiting to make a decision, and that's going to be the interesting thing. Thomas Lambert says, do you think Reese not being hands-on has more to do with Kelly handcuffs or Freeman wanting teachers at all position coaches? No, I don't necessarily agree with Vince that what I saw in the film today was significantly more than what we've seen in the past. I do think there's times in the past where Tommy took less of a hands-on approach, partly because they had a GA that was the quarterback's coach, and you let him do some of those things. Like, you let him have the pad that gets banged on, because that's the difference between a D3 receivers coach like me and a D1. One of the differences, I have to be out there being the one working on press release, and I don't have pads on my arm, right? So I got permanently bruised arms because of it. D1, you get your assistants or your managers, those other people out there. But I think that's part of it. I think the other part is Tommy just really wanted to be engaged and involved, and now he can do the way he wants to do it, as opposed to the previous coach. I don't think it's necessarily about Freeman wanting teachers at all positions. I think it's more about this is what Tommy's always wanted to do, and I do think he's more engaged. I never viewed Tommy Reese as passive as Vince has, and so that's a little bit of a different thing. But yes, it was noticeable that it was more. I didn't think the starting point was as bad, but I think that's more about just what Tommy wants and not having the Brian Kelly handcuffs on. for that one. That's just my 2 cents on that. M. Kostrup says, hey, Brian and Ryan. I'm changing Ryan to Vince. Is there a way for the quarterbacks? Oh, we actually already answered that one. Here we go from John A1. He says, I'm expecting the run game from 2020 with a 2014 pass game, first 8 games from the offense this season. So that's the 2020 run game with the Everett Golson pre-Arizona State pass game, right? I don't think that's going to be the case. Because they threw the ball a lot and really well early in 2020. I mean, there was the one game in Syracuse where Everett completed like 28 straight passes at one point in time. That was a bit absurd. And they didn't really run it a ton. I'm going to have to think about this one, John, because Everett passed for 295 against Rice. He went 23 of 34 for 226 against Michigan, 362 against Syracuse, 300 against North Carolina, 315 against Florida State with 52 attempts. Yeah, he threw 40 attempts against Purdue, 39 against Syracuse, 43 against Stanford, 38 against Carolina, 52 against against Florida State. You know what I think? I think the 2014 game that to me is gonna show what this pass offense is gonna be like, Ryan. To me, it's the Rice and the Navy games. And against Rice, Everett went 14 of 22 for 295 yards. And against Navy, he went 18 of 25 for 315 yards. I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to see more of the big plays in the passing game on maybe fewer completions. I see more of like 18 of 25, 17 of 26 for 250 plus is kind of more how I see it. As opposed to just 362, 300, 313, 315, 446 from Everett that year.
What was Everett's completion percentage that year, if you don't mind me asking?
60.
60. Okay, so solid number.
Yeah, and it went down later in the year. I mean, he was 38.9 on 18 attempts against USC, and he was 54. So, like, in his last 5 games, he was 53.7 against Arizona State, 52.5 against Northwestern, 66.7 against Louisville, 38.9 against USC, and 54.5 against LSU. He was much better early. He was 64 against Rice, 68 against Michigan, 63 against Purdue, 82 against Syracuse, and then was 46.5 against Stanford in the rain, if you remember that game. And then 55, 60, 72. So he was well over 60% through the stretch that John was talking about. He was, I would imagine, closer to probably 63, 64. And then obviously was well under that in the last 5 games.
80-something% in a football game is just ridiculous.
He completed like 20-some straight passes in that game. It was absurd.
That is absurd, man.
And go ahead.
I imagine Tyler Buchner is going to – I think he's going to complete a decent amount of – like a decent percentage of passes. I imagine it's going to be a lower volume, higher percentage, because I think that the run game is going to be an emphasis. I really do think. I think it's going to be at a higher emphasis and a higher efficiency rate this year, I would imagine. So I think everything's going to work a little bit off of that, because that's where the RPO game comes into effect, the play action game. Like, I think that's where Tyler Buchner is going to be his best, is just off of that run action early on.
I think 2015 is going to be a closer example of what the run game is going to look like. And the reason I say that is because Ian Book did not run the football as a runner. This is what people have to understand. Ian Book ran for a bunch of yards in his Notre Dame career. Very few of them came on runs. They were all scrambles. He was a very good scrambler. He wasn't a runner. And not that he couldn't necessarily, they just didn't have him do it. So I want people to understand that's not a shot on Ian. It's just was the nature of the offense. It was more, he was getting his yards from scrambles. 2015 and 2017, I don't think, it's hard for me to expect this offensive line to play like that one and the run game to be like it was. I mean, that was almost 270 yards that year. I think when I look at 2015, because the other thing about 2020 is they ran for 211 yards, but they were only 5 yards a carry. They were not a big play running game. They were a grinded out team. And I don't think this is going to be a grinded out running game. I think it's going to be a lot more like 2015 was, Ryan, where it was a big play rushing attack. Now, I think this offensive line is going to be a little bit more, this offensive line is going to be, to me, is going to be a little different because the running back style is different, because you had CJ Pro. Once Torian Folson went down, your efficient runner was gone. I think this offense will be more efficient than that line was, or than that team was, because of the backs, not because of the line. That was a heck of a line. But I think that, the 5.6 yards per carry, I think that's more of what I expect to see than what we saw in 2020. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was trying to go back and look a little bit at some of the numbers, but I would say, like, I think that this offense this year is going to be just an efficient offense. I don't know. I'm curious to see, because I expect Chris Tyree to be a guy that can create some explosive plays. I expect Braden Lindsey to create some explosive plays. I'm curious to see it tangibly, like how much of a volume of those big plays are, but I imagine a yards per carry is going to be very solid. I imagine, like I said before, completion percentage is going to be very solid. I don't anticipate a high volume of passes. Like, I would say 20 to 25 passes in that kind of barometer, somewhere in that ballpark, is the number that I'm looking at off of the play action, off the RPO game. So as far as a direct comparison to a year, I don't really have a great answer for you, John, but I will say I just think efficiency when I think of this team.
Yeah. I think that this unit won't be quite as explosive running the ball as the 2015 team was, because the 2015 offense was just, it was like it had multiple 90-yard touchdowns. CJ had one. I do think it'll be a lot more efficient than that line was, than that team was. I do. The running backs, like Logan Diggs is going to have a mess of 20-yard runs. Like Audric will have a mess of 20-yard runs, but they're not going to have the number of 50 plus that we saw. And because the thing about the 2017 line, Ryan, is you had the quarterback and you had like 3 running backs that could do that. This year, I think there's really, unless Jadarian Price plays a bunch, there's really only 1 running back and the quarterback that'll do that. But I don't think Tyler's going to run it as much as Brandon did. That's the other thing. I don't think the volume as the quarterback runs is going to be what it was, because they had to run Brandon because he couldn't throw at times that year. They had to run him, otherwise he lost value. There's going to be games where Tyler doesn't run a lot, at least not on design runs. It'll be scrambles, because he kid can throw the ball. That's why I like that John said 2014 pass game, not 2017 pass game, because he can throw the football. I feel like I do feel a little bit more optimistic about the explosiveness. I think Michael Mayer obviously can make some big plays, but I think Lorenzo Styles is going to be a big play weapon, because we've seen him do it already. We've seen him run a reverse. He had a 50-yard gain on a reverse last year. It ended up only being credited as like a 36-yard run or something, because a hold way down the field brought it back a little bit. He had a couple big plays like that. I think he's a guy that can make one guy miss, and he can stretch the field vertically. We've seen Avery Davis at times be able to make big plays. He had the big play against Clemson. He had the 60-yard touchdown against Purdue last year. But he's not going to be like a high-volume big play guy. But with Lorenzo, with Braden, with Chris Tyree, and with Tyler as a runner, I think you've got a lot of big play guys. And that's why I think the yards per play this year is going to – if the offense is as efficient as you think it'll be, Ryan, and I agree with you, this offense has a chance to match the 2015 team, which set the program record for yards per play. Because I don't think that was a super efficient team. They were super explosive with Will Fuller and CJ Procise and Josh Adams. It was insane. And you had Deshaun Kaiser ripping off a 70-yard run on a read zone against Temple. You know what I mean? Like, it was a big play offense. It was not an efficient offense, because you had a redshirt freshman quarterback that wasn't prepared to be the starter. He had to take over from Malik. And you had your starting running back, who would have been your efficient guy, go down in the opener, and you had a converted receiver playing the rest of the year. He got hurt, and you put a true freshman in there. It was a home run offense. I don't think this team will be quite the home run that was, but I think they're going to be way more efficient. So I do think this team has a chance to get to competitively go after that mark, in my opinion. I don't know if you completely agree with that.
Yeah, I think there's the possibility to the points that you're making. It's just one of those things where you just need to see it happen first.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, no doubt. You had minimum 7.2 yards per play in each of the first 4 games that year. You were 7 against Texas, 7-2 against Virginia, 7-4 against Georgia Tech, 8-6 against UMass. They were even 6-5 against Clemson. But see, the Clemson game to me was the epitome of why that offense couldn't score in big games.
Mm-hmm.
Because they averaged 6.5 yards per play. No one that thinks right now about that game would have thought that they had 6.5 yards per play. But
that's the one where Procise broke the long run to get him back in it, right?
No, it was a wheel route. It was a wheel route.
A wheel route. Yes. I remember now.
It was to Procise, but it was a wheel route. And then you had 2 long crossing routes. One long crossing route to Chris Brown, and then you had the one from Will Fuller. They just hit a few big plays. But overall, they were not efficient at all in that game. But that's just that like I said, that game, like even Temple, they averaged 7 yards per play against Temple. That was a super inefficient game. But they had the 70-yard run by Kaiser. You had the long pass play on the last drive to Alize Mack. And then you had 20-some yard touchdown pass to Will Fuller. They just hit a couple big plays. And that's why that offense was so up and down. I mean, one week they look like world beaters, and the next week they can't move the ball on anybody. I think this team will be a lot more efficient than that. I just think the nature of the offense will be more efficient. And I think that Tyler Buchner is to me, is a better it's going to come down to that, though. If Tyler Buchner is the passer that you and I think he can be, then that's going to be the key, in my opinion. Thomas Lammers also says Jabron Payne just said he is committing April 15th per his Twitter. Does Notre Dame have a shot? And then Coleman Smith is, how does Jabron Payne complement Jadarian Price if they use on the same field at the same time? Coleman, I don't want to ignore your question. We will address that if the time comes on Friday in our show. As far as does Notre Dame have a shot? Yes, Thomas. I would encourage you to we're going to have an update on the message board here on him in a little bit, but yeah, they definitely have a shot. I mean, they have a great shot on that one. We'll have to find out, what his ultimate decision is, but yes, they have a shot. Ty B, we'll try to roll through some of these because we do have to get rolling. I just realized we're 2.5 hours in. You guys are awesome. So many questions and just hanging around. I love it. I look at the numbers aren't dipping. So, but we got to get out of here. Ryan, does Notre Dame have a shot with Jaden Greathouse?
I mean, yeah, Ty, they have a shot. I think that it has been trending in the right direction since Coach Stuckey came on the staff, because he's a player that hasn't been offered by Notre Dame that long, really, when you think about it. He was just a early January offer for Notre Dame. So they were definitely behind in the recruitment for Jaden Greathouse, but I think it's trending in the right direction. Ultimately, I think it's going to be a tough pool, but I don't think it's an impossible pool. So I think there is a shot. Definitely with the timing of everything, they aren't in the best position that they possibly can be, but they're certainly in the conversation, I think, especially since he's going to be on campus a couple times here in the next couple months.
Mm-hmm. John A1 says the only team that has a better defensive front than Notre Dame on the schedule is Clemson. I'd have to think through the schedule, but my immediate reaction is to say I agree with that.
I want to pull it up real quick, but I think I agree as well.
Like, I always wonder about BYU because they always have like some 28-year-old nose tackle, kind of guy, and they always get some
a Kafusi.
Yeah, you always get some edge player that there's always a Kafusi there. They always get these edge players like Ansa that you've never heard of until they become like these All-America type of players. But yeah, I can't think of anybody on the schedule. Stanford doesn't, Ohio State doesn't, USC doesn't, BYU doesn't, BC doesn't, Stanford doesn't, UNLV, Cal, Marshall, North Carolina. It just
honestly, outside of Clemson with Brian Bresee and Miles Murphy, nobody's even close. To be honest.
Davis is back. That's how Tyler Davis is back. He's a beast.
Yeah, he's been banged up, but yep, he is.
Yeah, he looked good in the spring game for them. He looked healthy, I should say, in the spring game for them. But yeah, that's a really good defensive line. So yes, no question. And Xavier Thomas is healthy. That's the other one. Yeah. So hopefully he can stay healthy. Because
I'll tell you what, man, the Murphy kid is impressive, but that Bresee kid was made on a different planet, man. Oh man, I watched a little bit of him the other day, and I'm like, that dude is like Ndamukong Suh reincarnated, man.
He's just got to stay healthy, man. That's been the issue for him so far, and just another reason why young kids should not be going straight to the NFL. I've heard some NFL. No, every single kid I've ever seen needs time in college and the NFL. It's a different animal, in my opinion. I'll give this to you, Ryan. John A1 asks, how would you compare Josh Burnham and Samuel Mpemba?
Little different. I mean, obviously, Josh Burnham, I think, as a space player, is going to be a little more consistent as far as understanding spacing, working into space, working into coverage. And Mpemba's a little more of an explosive, true pass rusher type. So, he, I think, could be a higher volume sack guy if he ends up as a Viper. But I think Burnham is probably a more versatile player. But I think the upside from Mpemba is just a little higher just because I think he's a little more of an explosive athlete. Body type-wise, they're pretty similar. They're both 6'4" guys with long arms. like Brian said, I think Mpemba's probably even a little heavier than Burnham is right this second. So I think there's a little more projection as far as like how each of them can weigh down the line. So I think there is some similarities. I would just call Joshua Burnham more of your traditional, like, he's your true like Sam in a 3-4 alignment, right? Where he's going to work in space a ton. He's going to be an overhang defender, working in coverage, doing all those types of things. While Samuel Mpemba's like a true, he's a guy that you want working off the line of scrimmage. He's like that weak side pass rusher type. So they're just a little bit different in my opinion, even though Samuel Mpemba's a guy that Notre Dame likes as a rover. So he's going to be used a lot in space a ton, but I just think that he's a little more of an explosive downhill type of player, while Burnham's a little more of a rangy athlete type that's going to be better as a versatile piece.
I think Burnham's a more natural football player too. I think Samuel might be more explosive. I think Burnham's got better lateral quickness and agility. Right now, Mpemba's all about projection at this point in time. I mean, we haven't really seen him play a lot of football since his sophomore year when he was playing in St. Louis. So Josh is a more versatile, like is every bit as versatile, but more rangy. I think Josh is better working laterally and backwards, like in coverage, where Samuel's a guy you're going to want working downhill. And I think Samuel's a lot bigger than Josh was at the same age too. Like Josh has really started to fill out over the last year. Samuel's just big. He's always been big. We got a super chat here from Charlie Moore. I pay for my information and knowledge. I appreciate that very, very much, Charlie. He also says, compare, contrast Book versus Tyler Buchner at this respective points in their careers. That's an easy one. Ian Book was not ready to be a starting quarterback, and Tyler Buchner is. Tyler's a more dynamic athlete. I think Ian probably had a slightly Ian threw a better deep ball. Ian Book threw a nice deep ball. He just didn't have the guts to throw it very often. But when he did, he threw a nice deep ball. Wasn't super accurate with it early in his career, but he could throw it nice. Tyler's got it. He's bigger filled out. He's more dynamic athletically. He shows significantly greater. Tyler Buchner shows more anticipation now than Ian Book showed as a senior. Just as far as reading defenses. Ian just was a gamer, man. That's the thing you say about Ian. For all the flaws he had, the kid competed. And if Tyler can compete like that, he's going to be a way better quarterback because he's just significant. I mean, Charlie, honestly, there's no comparison other than maybe height. And Tyler seems to be a tad taller. I see no comparisons between him and Ian Book. I just don't. They're just not in the same universe, especially when you look at it from the same age. You know what I mean? Thoughts on that, Ryan?
Yeah, I think you hit most of the things, right? From a physical perspective, Tyler is a little bit taller and he's just a more physically well put together player. Dynamic athletes. I mean, Ian was a nice scrambler. He was a nice kind of improviser as a passer, but he wasn't a guy that you ran a ton of, even though you probably should have more at time, but like he wasn't a big zone read guy, wasn't a big power read guy. Mm-hmm. I think that Tyler just gives you a little more upside as a pure runner. And I think that there's, I mean, especially at that point in their career, like they're just, I would say that Tyler's just a little more along as a developed type of football player, right? Yeah. Like, and again, I think that Tyler sees the game a little bit quicker, but I agree with you. I think that Ian had a good arm, right? Like it was plus arm strength and he could throw a nice deep ball. It was never the physical limitations with Ian.
And it gets talked about a lot. Oh, he doesn't have the arm. I've never questioned Ian. I've said this before. I watched Ian Book in warmups and I watched Jake Fromm in warmups in person live. And I'm like, even close who has a better arm. It's like just the ball comes out of his hand so much better than it did get. It was never physical with Ian Book. It was always this right here. I'm trying to see if we can get to just a couple more here. I want to get down to here. Cowboy, Katie Boy, 863V. Based on your limited view of the offense this spring, do you see Notre Dame being ranked in the top 25 in total offense this year? They better. Absolutely. They were about 43rd in yards per play last year, 45th in yards per game. They absolutely better be in the top 20 this year, in my opinion, yards per play and yards per game, Ryan. Especially yards per play. Again, I care more about yards per play than I do total yards because that's so dependent on so many other factors than yards per game.
It's a big letdown if they're not. I mean, that's just the point blank period, especially because every report that we've kind of gotten, and again, it's just limited viewing from our own perspective, but offense has been just a little more impressive than the defense this spring for the most part. So that is a bad indicator if they're not that improved and the defense is not playing that well. So, I mean, it better be. You better hope.
No doubt. Last three, and we're going to get out of here. Garen Knudsen says, what's the minimum we must score against Ohio State to win? 35, 40. I think they need to minimum get to 30. I think that because, again, you look at the two games Ohio State lost last year. They scored 28 and 27, right? Like, I don't think you need to score. You don't need to score 40. You may have to score 40. It just depends on how well your defense plays. But if the defense plays well in that game, I think a 31 to 27 game, 34 to 31, something like that. I don't think Notre Dame has the horses in the secondary and all around to hold them to the low number they did, and like Clemson did in 2019. I think that was it's also that Ohio State offense wasn't as explosive as this one is either, in my opinion. So 31 minimum, 30 to 31 is the minimum. Ryan, you agree or disagree?
Right, that's how I know you're so smart. You always agree with me, man.
There's a reason I hired you, man.
31 was the number that popped in my head immediately. I was like 31 to 34, like somewhere in that ballpark. Because like you said, yes, Ohio State is a very explosive offense. They're going to score their points, but you expect Notre Dame to be a very formidable defense that's going to be able to, keep some guys in check. You're not going to completely eliminate Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Hold them to field goals instead of touchdowns. I mean, they're going to score. Hold them to field goals instead of touchdowns. Limit the big plays, come up with some own big plays of your own. David Solomon says, I think Tobias Merriweather is going to be our second best receiver by season's end. He's 185, but I hope he's 195 when he gets to Notre Dame. I'm not going to predict that, David, because I need to see him show up. But would I be shocked if Tobias Merriweather passes people over next year? No. I've said this before. He's the best receiver he's the highest graded receiver for me on my board to sign with Notre Dame since Michael Floyd in 2008. That's how high I am on Tobias Merriweather. He just is, right? And so no, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being that guy. I'm not going to predict until I see him show up and look a little thicker than he was when he ended the season. And then last one, I think this is from Ladarius. We got to get Ladarius in here since he's back. Most hated dynasty, Brian and Ryan, Miami or Alabama? That's an easy one for me.
Just out of those two. Out of those two.
Yeah, you can give one of those two, and then give another one, because there's another one I think that maybe in our lifetime that I think you might go to. But go ahead and answer both.
Out of those two, I would say Miami. I just I hated the turnover chain thing. I hated the Catholics versus convicts thing that they tried to make a relevant thing because Miami was good all of a sudden in quote unquote for a year. Like they annoy me a little bit. I have respect for Alabama and what they've done, so I don't have any problem with Alabama, honestly. So Miami would be the easy one in that conversation. My number one all time it's Michigan. It is. It's always going to be Michigan.
But were they a dynasty though? Were they ever?
Oh, are we talking about just dynasty? Okay, I was just thinking about most hated team.
Yeah. I go USC dynasty. 2000s. I couldn't stand that because it's USC. Would be the Notre Dame rivalry that was a dynasty that I didn't like. Honestly, that one's easy for me. I despise Miami because I didn't like how they conducted themselves.
Sure.
And obviously they beat Notre Dame in '89, which I didn't like, but I don't hate Alabama. I know a lot of fans do. I don't, because Bama's not a team that talks a lot of trash. They don't run their mouths. They play hard. They play well. They're well coached. I despise some of the coaches they've had. I don't like Lane Kiffin much. I despise Bill O'Brien, but I don't hate Alabama. I don't, especially since their first title was a relatively mediocre, talented team compared to the later teams they had. I mean, they won a freaking title with Greg McElroy. Javier Arenas and Kareem Jackson were not highly ranked recruits. They had Eric Anders as he started at outside linebacker for him, and so that team I just don't hate Bama. I respect Bama. I want to beat Bama. I don't like certain things but those were true when they weren't good, about some of the academic things. But I despise Georgia more than I hate Georgia. I can't stand Kirby Smart. I hated watching them win. I don't dislike Alabama. To me, I look at Alabama and say, hey, you want to be a championship program? Why don't you take some of the lessons that you can learn from there? That are about the process and toughness and discipline. And that's the thing I think has been most overlooked about Bama. Bama has been able to be consistent because they've recruited great players, but they develop players at an exceptional level, and it's been consistent. And, that's why, again, and I'm not saying that because Ladarius knows I've taken some shots at Bama with him here. I don't hate Bama. I despised Miami. I didn't like I enjoyed watching USC play, but I also didn't like him because I hated Pete's lack of discipline. I despised it.
Yeah.
I just didn't like it.
Alabama's like they're like Tom Brady to me, you know. It's like you just kind of want them to go away, but I respect the heck out of what Tom Brady did during his career. You know, I respect Alabama's dynasty. So
dislike them, but respect
dislike them. Sure, yeah,
right.
Dislike them, want them to go away, but you don't hate them.
Right. You want to beat them. That's the thing is you want to beat them. Charlie Moore, to heck with USC hatred. Thank you for that, Charlie. Last question, Ryan, before you go. I'm gonna let you start off because if you got to run, I can answer while you run. Because Ryan has to go. He's got a 1-year-old he's got to deal with. Hi, guys. Anthony Shea. Thank you for the super chat, Anthony. Can you give a quickie on how you became Notre Dame fans, please? My father and grandfather both went to Notre Dame. My dad's roommate was Daryl LaMonica. That's pretty cool.
That is really
pretty cool.
Mine's pretty simple, Anthony. I had a choice. I've said this a couple times on the show. My mom was a St. Louis Rams fan at the time. My dad was a Miami Dolphins fan in the NFL side of things. I had a choice on what team I ended up rooting for. I ended up taking the Rams because they were the greatest show on turf when I was, really getting into football. But Notre Dame is the only team that my mom doesn't like college football. My dad is the biggest Notre Dame fan I've ever met. So I had no choice whether I can't remember a time where I was not a Notre Dame fan. So I honestly just didn't have a choice in the fact. I grew up, I remember some of my first memories was the end of the Bob Davie era going into Tyrone Willingham. So it's not like I grew up in a great time to be a Notre Dame
poor guy.
fan,
my first memeries were Lou Holtz winning a championship in 88. Yours were Bob Davie. You poor kid. Youth isn't always better, man. It's funny. My parents were big Redskins fans. I grew up as a Broncos fan because I love John Elway. NFL, college football, my dad was a Notre Dame fan. And I've said this before. My dad became a fan because growing up in Virginia, there was no college football to speak of. The ACC didn't have good football. And my dad would watch the Lindsey Nelson replays on Sundays. And that's how he became a fan. It's the reason he became a Yankee fan because, Yankees were the major league team. And then when he moved to Ohio, he became a Reds fan because of the Big Red Machine. But, so I followed my dad on baseball, same team, both Reds fans, both Celtics fans. Football, I was different. I took a different NFL team, but then college football is the same. It's like the same as my dad. He was a Notre Dame fan. I became a much bigger Notre Dame fan than he did because he was always for more NFL than college, where I was always kind of balanced with both. But that's how I became a fan. And then, of course, the first game I ever watched Notre Dame was with my dad, which I still say is a pretty cool moment. And it makes me almost be okay with the fact that they got absolutely stomped by USC. It was in 2007. But the second Notre Dame I ever went to, I went with my current wife, who was my girlfriend at the time. And I've shared this story. That is when I knew I was going to marry her. Ryan, I don't think I've ever told you this, but I've said it on the show before. Jimmy Clausen had just thrown a touchdown pass. There was like 5 minutes left in the game. It was cold. It was like rainy. It was like 30-some degrees and raining. I was miserable. The team had sucked that year. It was like, we're excited about being Duke. And I looked at her and I'm thinking, she's probably miserable. If I'm miserable, I know she's miserable because she doesn't like college football. And I looked at her with like 5 minutes left to go a game. I said, hey, are you ready? I knew they were going to win now. I said, hey, I'm good to go if you want to go now. And she looks at me and she goes, there's some 5 minutes left in the game. Are you nuts? And I was like, oh my God, I'm married. I'm so marrying this woman. And of course, by the next fall, we were married. Or by the next April, we were married. So, So just like you, Ryan, just Notre Dame fan it was either that or root for Ohio State, which everyone else in my family was Ohio State fans growing up in Northwest Ohio. So that wasn't going to happen. So it was all Notre Dame for me. So very, very similar. Our dads, you can thank our dads, everybody. You can thank our dads. You meet Mr. Roberts, who I've met, very nice man. And you meet my dad. You can thank them for why we are sitting here doing what we do.
And if anybody comes to the blue and gold game, if you come to the tailgate or meet up, you'll also meet Mr. Roberts, who will be in attendance as well. And Mrs. Roberts and
I'm
maybe
still
Juliet.
bummed you guys aren't bringing the RV, man. I'm still a little bummed about that. So
I know gas prices are a little high right now, my friends.
I understand. Well, especially where you live and where you got to drive through. With all due respect, there's a lot of blue states with higher gas prices that you got to drive through to get over here, man. So
that's fair. That's fair.
I'm teasing, just teasing. So I like to joke on Ryan about where he's from. Anyway, everybody, have a great day. Ladarius, great to see you back in the show, man. You just know we've been praying for you and your mom and your family. We're glad to see you back. Thanks to everybody else for being on the show today. A lot of fun. Get to the message board. I'm going to have a big picture thoughts on where recruiting stands right now that I'm going to put on the message board. That's going to be for message board customers only. So you're definitely going to check that out. Check out our front page content. Ryan's going to have some more recruiting stories up. We got some things that I got to put a Charles Jagasol. Sean interviewed Charles Jagasol from his visit. So we're going to talk about him. and kind of how things went for him. So definitely make sure that you read all those. But again, sometime tonight, I'm going to put my just big picture thoughts, some scoop that we're hearing, some different things, just a really big recruiting feature, part opinion, part what we're hearing, all that kind of stuff. You don't want to miss out on that. So Ryan, thank you for joining us. Vince, obviously kicking things off and getting things rocking and rolling. Hit the like button, right? Let's take this one down. As Mace K always says, join the message board, headbutt the like button, subscribe to the channel, drop the elbow on the notification bell, and share the podcast. Woo! Go Irish. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Talk to you again very, very soon.